Good morning, everyone. We'll get underway. A warm welcome to the ordinary meeting of the Infrastructure Committee on the 19th of November 2020. Warm welcome to councillors and our youth councillors. Elise, I think this is your first meeting you've had for the year, so 2020 is, with the disruptions we've had, this is the first opportunity. And Nathan, I know you've got a big exam today, so make sure that you get away on time. Inspiration and dedication. And a warm welcome to the officers and our colleagues from Tasman District Council, Councillor Trinity Walker and Councillor Kit Mailing. As our custom, we will begin with kara kia. So, Etu. Kia hoa te marina, kia whakapapa panamu te mona. Hei huira ma ratu I te rangi nei, arahu atu, arahu mai, tatu I tatu katoa, hui e, taiki e. Right. Moving on to the agenda, we'll deal with the apologies first. I have apologies for Her Worship the Mayor, Councillors Edgar and Councillor O'Neill Stevens. They're away on council business, and an apology from Councillor Rainey and an apology for Councillor Laurie just for lateness. So someone I'll move Councillor Courtney, seconded Councillor Sanson. Those in favour will say aye. Against, carried. Confirmation of the order of business. As per the agenda, I'm aware that many of the councillors here have a luncheon appointment at 1 o'clock. We aim to be done by 12:30 today, so they're able to get there in time. There are no other changes to the agenda. Anyone else needs to be away at any particular time or has to be stepped out because the quorum is actually quite tight? Great. Just a reminder about your interests. If there's any interest that you need to declare at the appropriate time, please do so. Confirmation that we are also being live streamed. Keep the speakers' microphones on when speaking and off when you've stopped. Recommendations will be up on the screen behind me, up there, and any amendments, the one to my left, your right. I am not aware of any amendments coming through, but if there are any amendments put forward, could I have them in writing beforehand? No public forum. We'll deal with the confirmation of the minutes. The meeting dated. Let's have a look. Page 8. 1st of October. I'll take them as being read. Any matters arising? Someone prepared to move that they are true and correct record? Councillor Brand, seconded Councillor Bowater. Any discussion or debate? There being none. I'll put it, those in favour will say aye. Against, carried. Chairperson's report. On page 13, just the one item and, well, two items. I'll take it as read. Good news about the innovative streets. And I thought it'd be of interest to councillors the steps that were taken to have iwi involvement in the resource consent hearing application for the Nelson North Wastewater Treatment Plant. Very complex. So if there's any questions of members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be interested to know what sort of time frame there's going to be. It's a trial. It says here a trial on the innovative traffic calming measures, and I'm just curious to know if it's the work's completed on 30th of June 2021. What do you envisage as the possible time frame for assessing the worthiness of this particular calming measures?
I'll let Mr. Levitas answer that question.
Through the chair, ideally we'd like to go for 12 months because that gives us a full season. It takes us through the school holidays, it takes us through the busy period. So that gives us a good range to ascertain the effectiveness across the whole year.
I'd just love to hear a little bit more about the project. It's great that you've brought it up in the chairperson's report, and in terms of community group involvement in the design of the art, the planter boxes, and how will that relationship between council and our community work?
So through the chair, we already have quite a close working relationship with key members of the community. And the way I envisage that working, it will be a series of interactions, regular feedback, give and take, roundtable discussions at various stages until such time that we get agreement, and the chair and deputy chair will be involved, and mutual agreement. I think this is an ideal opportunity to show that we can actually work with the community. So. And we already have some good relationships.
We've already had drop-in sessions at the Nelson South Kindergarten, so the community have had really good feedback about what sorts of things they'd like to see happen, and it's a matter of just sort of formulating that up, developing a plan, and getting some measures in place. As the turtle's saying, time is moving, clock is ticking, so it needs to be done. So I've got Councillor Laurie.
I just finished. I just think that's a tremendous opportunity. Well done to everyone who worked on this. I know the community have worked hard on this as well. I just think it's fabulous, and I think it's a fabulous example of something we've been trying to achieve for years in terms of that close relationship with the community. So congratulations on receiving that funding.
Okay, then I've got Councillor Laurie, then Councillor Courtney.
Thanks, and this may have already been said, Mr Chairman, but I'd like to publicly thank Claire Scott for the incredible commitment that she's shown to community and to road safety, because without her efforts and her tenacity, we wouldn't be here. So I definitely think we should acknowledge Claire's contribution. When it comes to planter boxes, I always get a bit nervous because quite early on in the piece when I got into council, we were showing plans for a refresh for Bridge Street, which included some blue lines, which were somewhat controversial, and bright yellow bike stands, which still look great today, and planter boxes. And they look great for a while, but then they sort of probably got too many cigarette butts put in them and other things put in them, liquids put in them, and the plants all sort of started to die and look rather crook. So I'm just wondering, whenever I see planter boxes, I think about those planter boxes on Bridge Street. And I'm just wondering, are we going to, can we have some reassurance we're not going to set something up that looks great for the first 6 weeks?
Through the chair, we certainly won't be emulating what's in Bridge Street, but because this is a trial, we'll certainly be looking at something that is achieves its purpose, number one, looks good, and that also can stand the test of time, certainly over the next 12 months. So we're not looking at spending heaps of money. In terms of, so going long term, we'll need to ascertain whether the trial's been successful, and then we need to look at what we need to do to potentially formalise that. And that's something that we have money in the annual plan. But certainly over the next 12 months, we're looking for robustness and weather tightness, et cetera, et cetera.
Good to hear. And just a follow-up question, if it's okay, Mr Chairman. What are we going to say to all the other streets who come knocking on our door once they see Cowboy Street looking fantastic and kids playing in the street and everyone feeling happier? I imagine the streets of Nelson will be lining up for the same treatment. So what's our policy going to be with them?
Well, I have to say that this was a particular community that were very proactive and basically got themselves flying. If they see if it's successful, we'll deal with those when we come, and yeah, so it's part of the be part of the work program.
Oh, and through the chair, I think one of the if there is a positive that can come out of this, other than the relationships that we're working with the community, is that potentially this may be a blueprint for how we do things in the future, and how council deals with that will be something that we will need to obviously give council feedback, because there's dollars involved. We'll have to try and leverage off potentially Waka Kotahi, the NZTA in terms of funding. As you know, this is a new initiative, not only for ourselves, but also for Waka Kotahi. So, the potential's there, and we'll have to bring that back to council and determine what the implications of that are. But, if we can make this work and other people want it, I would say that's on the road to success. Really.
I'd say that's a win.
Yeah.
A win for Nelson Whakatū. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Courtney.
Chair, I'm just curious to know, are we one of the first off the blocks with this innovative traffic calming?
Through the chair, I can't tell you whether we're the first, but I know that we are one of the first in terms of the funding. Because as you know, we made an application, we made a good argument for NZTA, and I think we are one of the first. As to whether we're the first, I can't definitively say.
I have to say there was a bit of negotiation had to go with that. We didn't get it across the line the first time. Right, okay, I'm interested in time. Look, are there any other relevant questions to help with the decision, which is basically to receive a report? We've got Councillor Noonan and then Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just going back to what's going to be used. What communications or what work are you doing with the groups or the residents and the people interested? Are you working with them on selecting items? Is there anything?
Yeah, that's been asked and answered. This question this initiative has come from that community. In fact, if you remember, it was them presenting here about the
Yes, I
speed
do. And that's
going
why
down
I'm
the street.
asking, are we going to be working with
They
them?
got the lead on this.
Okay.
They hosted the workshops at the Nelson South Kindergarten.
Great. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Skinner.
Just quick, AstroTurf got me excited. Great to see the acceptance of AstroTurf and the usability of that. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Councillor Sanson.
Thanks very much. Just a comment really that if anybody's interested in looking at other examples that are happening, you can just search Innovating Streets case studies, and Waka Kotahi's got a couple of pages of examples of programs that have been completed around the country. Some really great stuff.
Right, thank you. Right, I think that's enough questions. I'll put it. Someone to second receiving a report. Well, you can have debate, but it's just to receive a report. Yeah.
Say that I think this one, as we were discussing what will happen if this is successful and it takes off. I think this one had some unique pieces in it, in that there is a kindergarten in the middle of a residential area. And I think that had some bearing because children had to cross. So it is an area that was busy. So that's why I supported it when it came through. And I think that has a unique difference to maybe some normal residential streets that aren't as busy because they haven't got a kindergarten in them. So I think it is unique in that respect. So I think that's something to be noted.
This is your report.
So through the chair, this is one of a series of reports reporting on behalf of the regional landfill and the NRSBU. The first one is the annual report, and this is provided. This is a standing item that each council brings back to its committees. And all I'm doing here is presenting that report. And if there are any questions, I have the General Manager, Mr. Nathan Clark, on hand, supported by Mr. Andrew Bishop, to answer any questions. But this is a standard report, just reflecting on the performance of the year gone by.
I'll open up for any questions. Councillor Courtney.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I need to thank you for the report on the NRSBU, but I need to understand a couple of things in the report, and that's on page 26. Page 26. And it's referring down there to performance achieved. The cost of operations is 2% lower than the operational cost for the year ending 30th of June 2013. Now, my simple question is, why have they used that as a comparison? The 2% lower than operational costs for the year 2000. I mean, that's 7 years ago. So I'd be curious to know why that's there, what's happened in the intervening years.
Through the chair, the rating or the basis on which we've based it is a historic basis. So I joined the organisation 8 months ago, and this was the basis that we were using at that time. And we've tried to maintain the basis until we set up a new basis for what's going forward. The idea about doing this was when we changed the contract, well, this is my understanding of it, and went from the previous contractor to the current contractor, the intent was to try and make sure that we were benchmarking our performance against the costs that historically we had incurred. So the implication from this is that when we renew the contract, which is required to be renewed this coming year, we would expect quite an increase. Right. So the basis was comparing to the previous contract is essentially what was intended.
Thank you for explaining that. Just while you're there, just back a page on 25, just for me to understand again and to get clear. I'm looking at the survey there at the bottom of page 25 in the various colours of red, blue and yellow. And I want to know that measure second along on the left, informed. What does that relate to?
So the idea behind that measure is that our customers in particular are involved in and informed about what we as Nelson Regional Sewage Business Unit are doing. So in order to do that, we essentially have a meeting with our customers in advance of each quarterly meeting for the Nelson Regional Sewage Board, and we explain the actions that we've taken over the last month, what our performance has been, anywhere there have been issues, and those other aspects of our operations that might involve them or have some sort of consequence on them. So it's essentially us in the survey, us asking them, are you informed? We have had some poor feedback in the past where changes have occurred during the year in relation to cost that they haven't been aware of. And the way the NRSB works, we do essentially a wash up at the end of the year, and some of our customers have had large bills at the end of the year, and that definitely creates an adverse effect for them, and that's where that a big negative comes from if we haven't had good conversations in advance of that.
So excuse me, Mr. Chair, through you. So these meetings, these customer meetings were born out of this dissatisfaction. How long have they been in operation?
They've been in operation for many years.
Oh,
so, yeah. So
I just noticed that the informed on the graph is the lowest of all of them. That's what.
And I think that this particular year there were some issues with the last year's wash up, because we had an increase in cost and about a $400,000 loss, which we needed to spread across our customers at the end of the year, which would have influenced our result, I would expect.
I'm looking through the chair. I'm also looking on page 24 and 25. And at the bottom of 24, it says odor management. A number of outdoor complaints were received in late summer. Approximately 2/3 were attributed to Rabbit Island biosolids application. And then in the graph on the top of page 25, there's a massive increase of 22. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The historic measure has been about odour events rather than odour complaints. The difference is an event might have had many complaints associated with an event that we had at Bell Island. We've changed the measure to try and reflect the number of complaints. So any individual ringing in and complaining about our activities or our odours would therefore be recorded as an odour complaint. Historically, that has not been the case. Historically, there has been odour events that have been essentially aggregated together. And so when you look at the the previous, 7 or 8 years, there's, one event might have had 20 people complain about it, but it was actually only recorded as one event. And we didn't think that was an appropriate measure. So we've changed the measure to make sure it reflects the number of actual complaints that we get for odour.
Nathan, that's an excellent question. And my suggestion, Nathan, having heard you explain it, is the title of the chart of the graph still says odour events. You possibly need to reflect that as historical and create a new chart moving forward so that the next 10 years we're seeing number of complaints in the new table, so we don't ask the same question.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you, Councillor Horton.
Well, good picking up. I do have a question. I have a quick question. So we had a wonderful visit to site visit a couple of months ago, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I can see that there's some amazing things happening in terms of Bells Island, sort of thinking about sustainability. How are you moving that forward? And have you, at the time you talked a little bit about some of the shoreline coastal sort of restoration work. How's that progressing?
So 2 aspects of that. We are in consultation at the present time, and we have a environmental landscaper company assisting us to work on our foreshore restoration activities. So that's something that is underway. In regard to the future works and the other things around climate change and all those things, those are part of our asset management plan or activity management plan submission, and that will be discussed later on today. So it will depend on whether or not.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Yeah.
I thought I did wonder that. All right. Just to receive, I did wonder that as I was asking it. All right, we'll move into the next one.
The report is the report.
Okay.
Moving along.
I've been moving.
Your report, so I ask you to present and highlight the matters that we need to consider.
So thank you through the chair. So this is this report is a requirement of each council following the approval of the business plan by the board to bring it back to each council so that each council can provide comment back to the board to consider before they convene to consider that and then take that into consideration, and then before I again present that to the council by March, which then feeds into its LTP. So in line with the requirements, the business plan is provided. I do note on item 4.2, page 52, that this report is also linked to the next report, which is the activity management plan. And any comments that apply here will equally apply to the activity management plan because one is linked to the other. So that's just for to close that loop. This report goes into a little bit more detail, and that's covered on page 53, item 5. And it notes, I note that in summary, that the operational costs and the budgets as presented by this business plan and as approved by the board to come to both councils for comment reflects a substantial increase in both capital works as well as operational costs. And I signal to the committee and to the council that in terms of the Nelson City Council overall budget, that the operational costs are extremely high, reflecting a cost year on year of about 4%, as well. And for 2021-22, it's in the order of about $611,000. And I take the step to point out that after consultation with our finance department, that this is very, very high and not sustainable. I also make comment about the capital works program, and equally that is, in my view, a little bit too optimistic. And I think that the general manager will reflect that statement. I'm not saying anything that's new. I do have, I do provide the committee on page 54 with recommendations, item 5.10. I haven't specifically put those in the recommendations because that'll ultimately be for the committee to decide. But my view is that this committee authorises me to write back to the general manager reflecting that the operational costs are too high and that they prioritise and smooth out the budget increases over the next 5 years, and that with respect to the capital and renewals program, that they look at prioritising that over the same period. I also make a comment that on item 5.3 that this, my view, is not inconsistent with the view from TDC, and having solicited comment back from them as well. So Mr. Nathan Clark is here to answer any questions, as is the chair of the NRSBU, Councillor Kit Mailing. But my comments with regards to the Nelson City Council are covered in the report, and I'm recommending that we write back to them.
This is a reasonably substantial item, so it'll take some time to sort of, for you to digest and opportunity to ask some questions. Help. So, Councillor Noonan.
Thank you. It's a wee bit sobering reading and hearing this, and without a sense of how it sits with all other council obligations financially, it's quite hard to actually, I agree with what you're going to do and respond saying it is too much for now. So have you got an option? Are you going to propose an option after speaking to our financial people? Are you going to propose something back?
So through the chair, I've already, because the time frames are quite tight, I've already had discussions with Mr. Nathan Clark in terms of the guidance, in terms of how I think he should be presenting back to the board, and I've given him a range of scenarios. But yes, I have indicated to him that he probably needs to look at the cost of inflation, the CPI or the local government, and do a range. I think Nathan understands that he has to produce something back to the board, and he has to give them a range. I'm unsure what TDC have advised Nathan in terms of specifics, but I have been sitting with Nathan and been advising that he look at a range of scenarios that the board can then consider. All I'm signalling is that we've done our homework, and clearly what is projected in the business plan is way too high, and it's not sustainable.
Can I continue? So for operating, it's straight on rates, isn't it, Mr. Levertis?
It might be.
And what would the rate?
Yeah.
Do we have a sense of what the rate would be? I just want to make this real.
Yeah, look, I suppose it might be helpful if Mr. Levertis, you explain how the NRSV is funded by the council.
So through the chair, as you know, the NRSBU is owned 50-50 between the two councils, and there are 5 contributors: the Nelson City Council, the Tasman District Council, Turners and Growers, which were previously NZA, and Alliance and Nelson Pine Industries. And as Nathan indicated in the annual report, the NRSBU, in simple term, runs their business, and they allocate costs according to the percentage. So it's not, the costs aren't quite allocated on a 50-50 basis between NCC and TDC. It's a lesser degree with the contributors also paying those costs. So these additional costs need to be considered in the overall scope of what the whole council does. And that's what we're signalling here. And obviously, it's also important for the contributors because they also have to budget and for for the payments that they need to make. There is a wash up, as Nathan indicated, Mr. Clark indicated, at the end of the financial year. And that really depends on how things have run through. But to work on a business plan that predicts such increases in OPEX and capital before we actually even start is not sustainable. Does that answer the question?
No, I was asking what the rate on what the increase in Nelson City Council rates would look like from this item.
So I've given that indication. So under item 5.5, that's in the order of about 611,000 for 2021-22. So it's about 1%,
1%.
just over 1%, yes,
Thank
which
you.
is substantial
Yes,
in the overall
it is.
picture.
It is. So just working on that then, if this work needs to be done, which obviously that would be the proposal is to do the work. If we can't fund it, will it just be delayed, or will they look at rearranging the program completely?
So, through the chair, what I've asked, what I've signalled in my report is no different to what you asked me to do. In terms of when we do our draft budgets for the LTP, I can't work in a vacuum, and I have to consider the overall works programs from an operational as well as a capital in relation to everybody's work programs. This is no different. So at the workshops, we present our draft LTP. We look at what that means from a financial point of view, and then you send me away and you ask me to relook at the budgets, which is the process that we're following now. This process of the business plan is exactly part of that process. And what I'm recommending in this report is exactly what you would recommend to me, for Nathan to go back, Mr. Clark, to go back to the board and relook at reprioritizing both from an operational point of view and from a capital point of view. And the options open to Mr. Clark are to spread the workload out over 10 years, 15, 30 in terms of what we normally do, and also to look at what is a nice to have and what is required to sustain the business. I don't know what that is, and I'm sure that's not the object of today. That's something for Mr. Clark to go back and think about. And as I said, because of the tight timeframes, I've already sat down with Mr. Clark about 2-3 weeks ago and given him a steer, anticipating that he needs to do this work, because it's also not inconsistent with the advice that he's received from the TDC.
Thank you. And I've got one more question relating to the capital. So at 5.8, we talk about the capital. So is our method of providing those funds by using our borrowing facility?
Yes.
And have our financial people given you any indication of how that's looking for the next few years, and how this would settle in the same situation?
Yes. So what we've said, and sorry if I haven't made this clear through the chair, that I've under item 5.10, I've suggested that Mr. Nathan Clark look at a reprioritizing and streamlining, not just for year 1, but for years 0 to 5.
I'll just comment that I just wanted to check that it sits, this is part of what sits in a big program of work, so I needed to check that it's been checked across by financials and how that sits, because this was probably a surprise to them, was it? The work, the figures maybe.
So the way we operate, so yes, so through the chair, yes to your question, we look at it, we look at this holistically. So we don't look at the NRSBU and the regional landfill in isolation. The regional landfill feels slightly different, and we'll come to that report. But in terms of the NRSBU, we look at it holistically in terms of another activity. Yes, from all aspects, from a delivery point of view, from a financial point of view, from a rates point of view.
Thank you, through the chair. I just have a couple of questions in terms of ensuring I understand the issues clearly. In terms of the capital, the height 5.8 in your report, Alex, so the 5.45, that refers to the table on page 64 of our agenda, I presume, where it's a breakdown of the CapEx figures, and we end up with 5.45 million. I'd just like to understand if you're requesting that be spread out into the future, what work which was planned to be done in 2021, 22 would be delayed, and why it was such a high amount in that year. Is it work which needed to be done? Is it essential work, or is it work that can be pushed back?
So through the chair, yes, and I cover that in my covering report, that under item 4.4.
Yeah.
So key features of the draft business plan for 21-22 are discussed below, and item 4.4, 4.4.4 and 4.4.5 gives you an indication of what those capital works and renewals are. It is, to answer your question, that's exactly what I'm suggesting in this report, that Mr. Nathan Clark go back and you relook at prioritising those. I can't answer that question.
So you don't know what's essential and what can be put. Okay.
I have an idea as to what's essential, but ultimately that is the job of Mr. Nathan Clark. And I also, through the chair, I don't think we should be debating around this table now as to what needs to be moved, because that's a piece of work that Mr. Nathan Clark has to do. All we need to do is provide guidance as to that he needs to do that work.
Okay, I have a subsequent question then in terms of the operating budget. So the emission management system on page 65, I assume that there's a cost in terms of establishing that. And I can't find that reflected in the report. So I would like to know, I see that as an important piece of work in terms of our sustainability and our climate emergency declaration. I'd like to know what's required to ensure that is a priority and remains in the 2021-2022 year.
So through the chair, I can confirm that the priorities of the Nelson City Council in terms of its climate change have been reflected in both the business plan and the activity management plan.
So you're not suggesting that get pushed back?
I am not suggesting anything.
Okay.
All I'm suggesting is that Mr. Nathan Clark relook at the total picture, of which the carbon emissions is but one of those aspects, take that back to the board with bringing a recommendation to us. Now, Mr. Nathan Clark and the board clearly understand this council's view on carbon emissions and where we stand on our climate change emergency, and the board needs to take that into account and prioritise that accordingly when they reconsider this matter. I have not advised them that that's not a priority. They know the priority.
Yeah. And it would be helpful if you look at further on the agenda when we're dealing with the asset management plan for wastewater. You'll see where climate change and emissions management is. It's right at the front of right at the top of the document.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand in terms of if we're pushing funding out, whether the funding for these pieces of work might be lost. So I'm just highlighting that that's a concern I have in terms of that conversation. I have one last question. Through the chair, you've suggested that the board consider these comments. I would have thought the board would have already considered that would be kind of concerns raised by council. So is it possible for the board to comment on why they reached the point where they reached now to bring this to us, and why they haven't had this conversation?
It's a fair question. Maybe that's a question I'll put to you, Councillor Mayling.
I'd like to split this into two. It's operating and capital. And I attended 4 days of the consent hearing last year, and we got a clear message from the commissioners that they thought we'd sweated the asset.
Right.
And I actually did some training with one of those commissioners in the last couple of weeks and was able to comment on it that we'd actually purchase some property so that in time we'll be able to send some of our wastewater to land, which is a real issue for our iwi partners. But if you look at operating and the cost increases, we need to look at, firstly, the contracts are up for renewal and they've been in place for 7 years. And the contractor happens to be Nelmac. Now, I don't believe in a real world that contract is going to be the same cost as it has in the past. So that's why the costs go up. And the other key thing is we've lost a customer. Turners and growers are going. Now, this is their last year operating, as I understand it, this summer coming up. Sedanco it's called. So that's 2.5% of income. So that has an impact as well. So from an operating point of view, those are two significant items. We don't believe we should be reducing the level of service because that puts your environment at risk. And in terms of, so that's how it operates in terms of the operating costs. Those are two significant areas that we just have to wear. In terms of capital, I can tell you that Tasman District Council Strategy and Policy Committee approved the plan in principle, but we've asked the manager to go back and look at pushing some items out. But I believe there are some critical items, particularly some pump stations and the ATADs that need to be done. The pump stations are vulnerable and you'll get an overflow. 2 pump stations, one in Richmond at Beach Road, which we've already had inundated, and the one at the bottom of Song Street. So again, those are critical, but we can push out some of the other items, and that's what we'll end up having to do. But the critical things, you don't want an overflow in your estuary. I don't want an overflow in the estuary. I fish in that estuary. I live in that area. And we'll just get crucified publicly. So to me, those 2 pump stations are really, really critical. And there is also some piping that is significant, but we're actually being innovative in sleeving it. So those are a bit of operational things. But the reality is these things cost money to run. We have sweated that asset over the last 20 years, and we got a clear message at the resource consent hearing. And a clear message from our EB partners. So that's why we made a strategic purchase. We can push out doing that, putting wastewater to land beyond the 5 years, which will help, but we've still got some costs. And to drop the level of service, I think, is the wrong thing. We will have to work out how we can make some savings, but it isn't going to be easy. So I hope that answers most of that.
Can I just ask 2 more questions? So in terms of the wastewater to land and progressing that piece of work, so was there an operational cost and a CapEx cost in terms of delivering that? And had you identified that as a priority in 2021, 2022? No.
So the cost of the land application system was sitting in the plan at around year 3. And it would be in conversation with Tasman District Council. They've indicated that they would like us to push it out into the final 5 years of the plan. So we've had some detailed conversations with the officers of Tasman District Council. In regard to many of the other things in 2021, a lot of those things are very, they're sort of urgent actions. Some of them are the fact that we need the capacity in our pipework system to allow us to get the current volumes that Tasman District Council discharge to Bell Island. So in large rainfall events at the present time, the Tasman District Council network overflows and it goes to the estuary. That happens. It happens. And so we need the capacity. The plan that we have today is actually a lesser amount of capital expenditure than the previous 10-year plan had for the same period. So what we found a way of reducing the cost of that pipeline from 16 million to 13.5 million. The original plan had the pipeline going down Queen Street and having a new pipe going to the other end of Bell Island. And we've actually found a way of providing that same capacity using older pipes and sleeving them. And the reason we did that was because the original plan had a budget in it of 16 million, but the cost was going to be closer to 30 million. And we didn't have that money in our plan. So we had to innovate and find that. So this, while we say this plan is very expensive, we've actually found savings to get to where we are. And it's going to be very difficult for us to do anything further. If we don't do the upgrades on the pipework, we will continue to have overflows from Tasman District Council. That's a fact. So it's very difficult for us to find changes in that piece. Another piece of the 21-22 year is the fact that the Bell Island treatment plant is sitting at the end of the power network. There is one power cable that comes to our treatment plant, and that cable is 40 years old and in the estuary, and nobody knows the health of that cable. So we think that the risk of that cable failing is high or very high. And if it was to fail, it would maybe take 6 weeks to fix. And we don't think that's an acceptable risk. So we want to resolve that risk. So that's another big chunk of this funding for the 21-22 year. So
So
So would
There
you-
are a lot of activities that we are proposing. We have really dug deep to try and not spend money. We've pushed a lot of stuff out. We started with a much larger number than this, and in conversation with the board, we've refined this down and down. Where we are is there is only a few things that are, inverted commas, voluntary, and one of those things, Kate, oh sorry, Councillor Fulton, is the land application system for wastewater to land, and that will get shifted out in order to make savings. I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
No, that's very helpful. So what I'm hearing, and I'm just going to rephrase it in my words, is that we've been sweating an asset and we've probably not been realistic about the real costs in terms of costs of the environment, costs of the Māori worldview, sustainability, climate change. So we've not incorporated we haven't fully incorporated that in, and been realistic about those costs. And moving into the future, we've also got ageing infrastructure, which needs to be brought up to scratch. And the board's already gone through and tried to make the cost as low as possible. So we've got a bit of a issue here. I need a few minutes to think about what Mr. Livingston said versus the.
Just bear in mind the recommendation that is there is just to provide feedback.
Yes, but they've already provided feedback, haven't they?
We're asked to give it back. Okay, I've got a bit of a batting order. I've got Councillor Courtney, then Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Nathan. Can you point me, please, in the right direction in this plan that you have, the 2021-22 year provision for some method to ameliorate the odour challenge that neighbours nearby are experiencing? Because you say in your report earlier, the annual report earlier, that all complaints and objections are addressed promptly, but that's not achieved. Some of the neighbours were not satisfied with the NRSBU response to odour complaints. So, bearing in mind that we don't live anywhere near that, we don't have to experience it, but we've got to be mindful of odours coming. And if your neighbours are not happy, what are you going to do to satisfy that or remedy that situation? And where is it in the plan?
The cost, a number of those items are being undertaken this year. So in our current budget, we have a new odour control system at the inlet works being installed. We have a new odour control system at the ATAD system being installed. We have an odour auditor who our previous one resigned, and we had trouble getting a new one, but we've got a new one on board now. So we have a range of activities that are going on in relation to that. In the plan, there isn't a specific item written odour management, but it would come under either our renewals at the inlet as in the plan here, which has got 1.2 million or thereabouts in that. And then there's some odour improvements as a $200,000 sum in the capital upgrades for next year in section 9 of the business plan on page 64 in that table. For covering the tanks as one of the another action that we have going on at the present time in this current financial year is the development of an app for our biosolids applicating company, our contractor, and that app basically allows the contractor to essentially select or push a button at the start of each day and then look at that gathers information from the weather stations and the predictions of forecasts of the wind direction and other things. It allows us to make the selection of the best of our available sites to reduce the likelihood of an odour event occurring to affected parties. So that's another change that we are making at the present time. Last year, we made a change that allowed us to have 2 particular open sites at the biosolids disposal area, so that one could be on the western side of Rabbit Island and the other could be on the east, so that we actually had the ability to apply in an area where it had less effect and from a wind, from a wind perspective, and therefore less likelihood of odour. So there's a lot of activity going on in relation to odour from our facilities. And the reason for that is, and this is my way of conceiving of this, odour is actually our interface with the public. So we need to make sure that we really are on top of that.
Thank you. I'm very satisfied with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Kit. Sleeving, through the chair, does sleeving reduce the capacity of a pipe, and how much of a long-term solution is sleeving?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The answer is yes, it does often reduce the capacity of the pipe, but it will all depend on the type of pipe that you are sleeving. So some pipes are rough and they have a roughness coefficient, reduces the flow. And if you put in a nice smooth liner, it therefore can actually sometimes increase the flow. It would depend on the size of the sleeve compared to the original host pipe. In our particular situation now, there isn't really another option other than building a new pipe, and which was between around about $30 million to do that. And we didn't have the money and any plans anywhere to do it. The second part of our consideration in putting this forward in that way was that the current plan is more let's say a 25-year plan rather than an 80-year plan. A new pipe would have somewhere like an 80-year life. But we don't know well enough at the moment exactly what the implications of climate change and sea level rise and all those things are going to be and how we as a community are going to adapt to those. So we chose to look at an option that is low cost, and gives us time so that we can get some of that information available to us and make a more rational call on what will happen in the future. And we've chosen to select those sections of pipework that we think will always be used, irrespective of what we do, to make them essentially new and have an 80-year life. But the pieces that we might not choose to use in the future, if there were changes in terms of climate, or whether changes to where Bell Island was, if we shifted Bell Island, we've then chosen to make them a slightly lesser solution and a lower cost solution. So essentially that's the way we've managed to reduce the cost of this program in order to get it inside the funding that we had available in our, that we projected we had available. So we believe this solution will have around about 25-year life. I mean, the pipe is said to have a 50-year life in terms of its, but we believe that after 25 years, we would be looking at something else anyway. We would need to be looking into adaptive migration from some of our pump stations or some of our assets, and at which point we would need to start thinking about new locations for pipework or what we do. So we think it's a pragmatic solution to that.
I just asked the chair a real back to basics question, if that's okay. So we've been sweating the asset for a decade, roughly. So we've been sweating the asset. So the money hasn't been going back into an account waiting for these sorts of challenges. Where has the money been going?
I'd have to direct you to the finance manager for that, or to Andrew Bishop.
Or you might say it's just been a lesser charge to each council.
I think that's probably a truth.
Reflected. Yep.
Okay.
And Mr. Bishop.
So there's always pressure on keeping costs down.
Yep.
And keeping rates down. So I would say it just means that the charges haven't been made going up. That's a comment from me. I'm sitting there for 4 years.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's happened is that when you sweat an asset, it lasts longer. So you continue to depreciate it, but you're not spending your capital. So what has happened is that the depreciation has funded the capital expenditure that has occurred over the period you've been sweating it. So in effect, you've been getting two savings. And yeah.
So through the chair, when I think about an asset that needs to be sweated, I think about something like the Trafalgar Centre. I don't think about the thing that looks after our poos and wees. That seems just too important to be sweating. What are your thoughts to that? Because I think other people will be thinking.
Through the chair, before Mr. Clark answers it, we try not to use the word sweat the asset. We try and the expression is maximising the useful life of the asset, and I do that for a reason. It's a term that is used in the roading industry. We try and maximise the use before we need to replace. So I just ask the committee, please not to use the word sweat the asset. Please.
Okay, good clarification. Thanks, Mr. Verse.
I think it's rational to maximise the life of your asset. I think it's a rational thing.
Yep.
I mean, but what you have to understand is your your criticality and the likelihood of and the consequence of failure. I mean, and you also have to make really informed decisions about when you do maximise the life of these assets. You have to say, you know, what is the actual life of this asset? What is the actual condition of this asset? And if you don't have all the data you need to be able to do that, then you're making sort of uninformed decisions which might come back to haunt you. And that's some of the stuff that we are facing at the moment. Last year we had 2 pipes collapse. They failed. Now, but for the grace of God, we were like at Wellington. You know, we don't want that. We have one of our tank roofs held up by scaffolding at the present time. The roof has collapsed. The structure has collapsed. We don't have the opportunity to do some of these things, you know, over time. They are something we have to do now, you know. So we have clearly maximised the use of our asset past its maximum life, I think, in some of these places.
So through the chair, has maximising the asset put us in a position where to do what we need to do now will end up costing us more?
I don't know the answer to that. It becomes a finance question. I think the answer is probably yes. And the reason I say that is that the construction cost index has probably increased at a greater rate than the CPI index. And so the difference between those two is probably what we're talking about now. People would say that that's probably not something that would normally happen because technology would improve and therefore the cost of some of these things would go down. But I don't know the answer to that. In our case, we have an asset management system that we run, and we, you know, historically, I don't know that at the level of investigation into the condition of assets was there. We are trying to get on top of that situation now. And then we will make an informed decision about each asset and how much life we think it has left in it. And we'll then extend or not the life of those assets as appropriate. What it does mean is that any asset that needs to be replaced, you know. And when we say how, I guess we can always shift some things out. And I always use an analogy about Granddad's old axe. I've replaced the handle on the axe twice and I've replaced the head once, and it's still Granddad's old axe. There are some of our assets that we can keep on fixing and keep on fixing and keep on fixing. The reason we have an asset management system is we meant to look at the cost of maintaining and cost of fixing and make an informed decision about putting a new asset in when that is a better decision financially or otherwise than continuing to repair that asset. And I don't think those decisions have necessarily been made all the time in the past. And we need to start making those now.
And this is a issue facing councils right across the country, isn't it? And I heard Stuart Crosby, the president of LGNZ, on 9 to Noon yesterday, talking about this very thing and about how, you know, going back to what you were saying, Kit, about levels of service, we just provide levels of service now that local government didn't do a generation ago, and we're not going back, and we find ourselves in these positions because of that.
If you think about the Three Waters Review, in terms of wastewater, there are 100 plants around New Zealand that are not consented. So we are, even though we've got to spend some money, we are in a much better position, because I know in Tasman all our plants are consented, and I'm sure yours are, and this is. So we've got a consent for 20 years. There are places around the country that haven't been able to get consents because they just haven't been able to afford the work. So there are certainly other communities in a much worse position. And that's, I'm sure, one of the drivers behind the government's Three Waters Review.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, through the chair. I've just got a comment, if that's okay, rather than a question. So I don't have a question, I have a comment, but. Sure. Okay. It was just yeah, sure.
Probably a question for you, Ms. Leverse. What were the 4 scenarios you gave Mr. Clark in terms of the feedback? That might be helpful.
So through the chair, I suggested to Mr. Clark that he look at potentially 3 or 4 scenarios where he look at a 0% increase, a CPI increase, a scenario where he looks at the minimum requirements to achieve his resource consents. And then the fourth scenario would be to look at the nice to haves, which is essentially either what is in front of you or a hybrid of that. Realistically, the 0% is not something that I would be recommending to this council, because clearly I agree with a lot of the comments that has been made by Councillor Mailing and Nathan. There are challenges out there, but it was purely following a discussion with our finance team to look at a couple of scenarios. And in order for Mr. Clark to present a comprehensive plan to the board, I would, as a minimum, have thought that those would be the four minimum scenarios. So that's the guidance I gave Nathan. And to be fair, Nathan probably had those in his mind already, but we were just bouncing ideas off each other.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Skinner doing scenarios over there. Councillor Noonan, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Fulton.
Thank you for that. I've got plenty of comments, but I'll hold those back unless required. With whatever we do going forward, as you understand, it's got to be what the TDC and NCC agreed step forward. So how's it going to work? So it might be a bit unfair to ask Mr. Mailing, or it may be. They're obviously heading in a certain direction on how they feel TDC can spend or can't spend. We've obviously become an illusion to either come to step with them, or we have an arm wrestle when they come into step with what we decide to do. How far down is TDC in regards to deciding, and how do we best come to a unified? I mean, both councils obviously only want to spend as much as they have to, but here it's quite important what we have to do here. So I don't want to get out of step with TDC.
Yeah, who wants to answer that question?
Through the chair, I'll just answer philosophically, and then I'll allow Mr. Kit Mailing to comment on behalf of TDC. So philosophically, this comes back to each council. Each council gives the views to Nathan, and then Nathan has the unenviable task of trying to sift through what TDC want and what NCC want, and look at the worst case scenario, I guess, or the best case scenario, and then presenting that back to the board. I have given Nathan a clear steer as to what I think he should be doing from an NCC perspective, and I haven't delved too much into the view as to what TDC has advised Nathan to work from, but that is something that I would have expected to come. But I'll let Mr. Councillor Mailing.
An indication.
Yep. So we've accepted the proposal and the reports in principle, and we've asked our staff to work with Mr. Clark to push out some of the capital. So we've been more focused on capital because it's debt, so not operational. It has an effect on our pan charge. So if you have one toilet, it costs you so much. If you have two, it costs you 50% more. And if you have three, some of our flash out houses have three, some have four, it costs you more again. So that's a choice. Well, so that's a choice people make. But from our point of view, is our staff are working with Mr. Clark in terms of pushing out some projects, and we've certainly identified the putting the wastewater to land as one of the big ticket items in that first 5 years. So, but we have concerns about pump stations really, and the piping. Those are, and I have a real concern about that ATAD, where I see roof held up by scaffolding. And it was the commissioner's words that I quoted in terms of the assets. That's the term they use, the head commissioner.
It's a good sporting word. Finish. I'm happy to add in regards to from being on the committee like yourself, but I'll happy to wait.
Thank you. I've just got two. It's very interesting, but also a sobering conversation, because I don't think this is the only asset that we need to, that we probably haven't been keeping up to scratch, and we're going to have to look at all of our assets. My first question is have we been having regular condition assessments?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry. I don't know the specific details, and the previous asset manager isn't on staff anymore. There has definitely been condition and risk assessments, but I don't believe that they've included intensive investigation. They haven't actually sent cameras down pipes, or they haven't, they've looked at things more from a surface perspective than an actual in-depth investigation.
Okay, therein lies one issue. So I'll leave that one to just settle. My second one is really regarding the depreciation, because we collect depreciation, and how much have we got stashed away?
So we don't stash away.
No, that's what I'm worried about.
So what we do is, instead of borrowing money, we use the funding from that. So if you look.
So it's like a reverse mortgage. We collect it and it goes in, but it keeps our debt lower. So what happens when we need to do 9 or 10 buildings or big projects and we need 5 million for all of them? How are we going to go on that?
So what we do is
and this man wants some of it, and he's already walking on a tightrope, I think, because he's got to balance up 2 councils. Tightrope, I had the high wire, actually.
Just don't borrow any scaffolding.
If we turn to page 66.
Yes, that's where I'm sitting. Sorry, I should have referenced it.
66. You'll see depreciation is in the last expenditure item 2.5 million for 21-22. Obviously, you don't spend cash on depreciation. You spend it when you buy the asset, and so it's only a book entry, but we fund it. So we're charging the customers, all 5 of them, for that depreciation. Then if you look down at the bottom, the source of funds, we've got the depreciation and new loans. Ignore the surplus deficit because that gets paid out to the 2 owners, 50-50. So between the depreciation, those cash that comes in from the customers, and what we borrow from the bank, we use that to renew the assets, repay loans, or buy new capital. So that's what we do with it. So there's no pot of gold sitting there, because it would be inefficient to put the depreciation and investment account getting 1% and then borrowing at 3%, whatever.
So I guess, Mr. Bishop, the risk is that you're going to have to call on those funds, which means with them borrowing, which if we've got multiple things needing to be done, we've got an issue, haven't we? Potentially.
Yes. So yes. When the NRSBU borrows money, it borrows from the 2 councils 50-50.
Yep.
And then the customers pay that back.
Yeah. Which is all right until you actually need large amounts of money like we need now, because actually, I mean, if we did have the pot of gold that we don't have because we are using it in a different method, then we would go, we need 8 million for this new project, and we can't really get it because we're using our facility at the bank, aren't we?
Correct.
Yeah.
So it comes 50-50 from the 2 councils, and they include that in their long-term plans. So yes. In the council's plans, it includes the funding required for the NRSBU.
So that's what we need for this project would have to go into our long-term plan along with all the other proposed amounts. And that's when we will find out what we can do then, isn't it?
And through the chair, yes.
Yes.
Exactly the process.
Thank you.
Could comment that we've had these borrowings in the plans for quite a while, but we've just found that the costs of some of the projects are a lot higher than what we originally thought. So we were intending to borrow. It's just that I know both councils have been borrowing money for other projects as well. We've got a little thing in the hill in behind Brightwater that's costing us a few dollars, things like that.
Leave that one with you. For coming.
Right. You done, Councillor?
I think there's enough to ponder on. Hopefully it will create some other thinking and some more questions from the table. But yeah, I guess in a nutshell, yeah, we've got some challenges.
Right. Back to you, Councillor Holden.
Oh, thank you through the chair. I just want to understand the intentions of the recommendation. So the recommendation is we provide feedback was your intention through you, through the chair, was your intention, Alec, to provide the feedback which is in section 5.10, or was your intention to provide feedback based on the comments in this meeting today? So when we say provides feedback in that recommendation, what was the intention?
So through the chair, I'll stop short as to putting in the recommendation as to what this committee should do. That decision is for the committee to do. I have given guidance in the report as to what I think that what that feedback should be. There's nothing that I've heard, and look, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that I've heard. I face the exact same challenges on my network. I face inflow and infiltration. I face,
Totally.
It's absolutely 100% the same. And you ask me those same questions. There is nothing that I've heard today that that changes my advice in the report, because clearly the rates are not sustainable. And so I haven't dictated. I've allowed the committee to make their own decisions. But as officers, my advice as an officer is the advice provided in that report, that more work needs to be done.
I understand what you're saying, and I think as Councillor Noonan said, we're walking on a tightrope, and I think one of the things that's happened with COVID is we've become very aware of risks in every area of our lives, and the fact that we have not had contingency funds to either pay for an event when it happens or to actually prevent an event from occurring. So this is a good example of this, where we're trying to ensure that we don't have overflow of sewage into our estuary, to ensure that we are valuing our environment more and more, to ensure we have sustainability wrapped around every asset management plan, and that comes with a cost. We should have been covering those costs for decades, but now we're playing catch up, and I'm not sure what the path forward is. I just would like to say that I love Appendix D. So through the chair, my question is, how can we incorporate Appendix D, the values of Appendix D, into our feedback and be really clear that those values are still key to us in terms of delivering them within budget? So I appreciate that we've got to get a budget which is affordable, because that's part of sustainable living into the future. We have to make sure we have affordable rates, but how do we try and ensure that those values are retained? So can you incorporate that into the feedback?
Which
Mr. Lavertis.
Through the chair.
Appendix D is page 70, sorry.
So through the chair, I'll take my lead from the minutes. And as I've said before, our view, the view that NCC has given the board in terms of everything, in terms of emissions, in terms of climate change, still ring true.
Thanks. Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, through the chair. So my question to the chair and to the GM of infrastructure is, how do we provide feedback if we don't actually have a question for Nathan and Kit? Obviously, lots of people around the table have asked questions and then made their comments. I don't actually have a question for them, but I do have comments. Are you wanting me to hold that for debate?
Yes,
or
please.
do I get to share?
I think for debate, this is questions. Basically, how I run my meetings is you have questions to help you understand, and there might be a point in the report that you don't want to understand, and then we can move into debate, express a view, and that's probably the important part where that.
Okay, it just sounded like that Alex was already taking on board people's kind of feedback, and I just feel like I haven't had an opportunity.
I'm happy to move. I'm happy to move what we've got on the table.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right,
Happy to
we'll
move
still
what
one
we've
thing
got
at a
and
time.
then give the feedback.
Councillor Stanson's speaking at the moment, so. So the point will be is that we'll move into debate shortly, once we've got something to debate, and Mr. Lavertis can make some notes.
But maybe my question should be, can I give my comment
Yes.
briefly to Nathan? Okay, thanks very much. So thanks, sorry about that. Kia ora, Kit and Nathan. Nathan, I just want to say to you and the board, thank you for the work that you're doing, for your kind of frank conversation with us today. And I have complete trust that the board is really mindful of our budgetary constraints, the risks of not maintaining renewals, and also mindful of, anticipating renewals into the future. So I am supportive of what the board is proposing, and I just want to say thanks very much. It's critical infrastructure, and we need to make sure that we are undertaking the work needed to maintain it for the community, and we definitely don't want to have, kind of a power line go down or pipes collapsing and that kind of thing. So just thanks, board.
Right. Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions? And right, it's been moved, Councillor Skinner, and seconded by Councillor Brand. So that's the recommendation as per the agenda.
So that's receiving the report and providing feedback, but I understand why that exact nature of that feedback or the tone of that feedback will come out in the debate of that I've recommended in front of there.
Right, that's it. So I've got a move by you, seconded by Councillor Brand. So that's the recommendation. So we'll move into debate.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I do have a question. How are you going to collate feedback given in a debate? Because that's every single person's view, and then don't we have to debate if we all agree on that feedback? So I just think it would be helpful to get comments and try and reach consensus on whether on what feedback we want to give before you debate.
Yeah.
Councillor McGee,
okay.
sorry.
The summary of the debate is, as you pointed out before, is probably summarised on 5.10.
Yeah, okay.
Is
so
that the officer suggests that request the general manager to respect the OPEX to prioritise and smooth out the budget increase over the next 5 years. So if you looked at the proposed,
so that is the feedback.
The proposed budget is over a 3-year term. The suggestion will be is that we smooth it over to 5 years. And in terms of the capital renewal, to prioritise and spread out the program. So that is up to the general manager and the board to decide what are the priorities. Bearing in mind, this has got to come back to us for approval. Yeah. So this is a preliminary stage to provide feedback.
So through the chair, if I could be of some assistance, if you agree with the comments in my report, in the officer's report, that the minutes then reflect that, and then when you, if the minutes reflect that this is consistent with the advice that I should be giving the general manager, then I will write to the general manager reflecting that. If it's not, then you need to indicate that.
In that case, can I move an amendment which would say agrees with the officers, so rather than provides feedback, so provides feedback based on the officer's advice? I think you need to actually be quite specific about what feedback.
So perhaps to be helpful again, maybe the resolution could read, provides feedback to the general manager of the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit on the draft Nelson Regional Sewerage 21-22 business plan in line with comments provided in the report, or blah, blah, blah.
And then do you want any additional comments from?
We'll see what comes out of the debate.
And of course, any additional comments that committee members may have, yes.
Bearing in mind is that it is the committee's view, not a individual councillor's view.
In line with comments as per the report.
There will be, what I'm saying, what I'm suggesting, or what I'm saying is that there will be a variety of views from individual councillors around the table, but the feedback is the committee's view. But anyway, that's an amendment. So because it's been moved, the recommendation is moved and seconded by Councillor Skinner and seconded by Councillor Brand. So that's an amendment.
So I'd like to make an amendment to that, and I'd like us to add in line with comments as per the report, and considering Appendix D, because I think Appendix D captures what. So that's page 70 of our report. That I would like that to be the focus of the funding.
Yeah.
Are we able to just reflect that as well, Alec? Because your report has sort of looked at the financials rather than the values.
Yeah, just the GAs for a moment.
Yeah, thank you. Because then it's not me, it's them, saying this is what they want to do. And it's much easier rather than us in an individual council.
At the moment, Councillor Folden, you have proposed an amendment.
Just to clarify, because I think there's a bit of confusion at the table, if I may, just, it might help, Councillor Ford, it might help yourself. So I'm moving as you know what, let's get completely clear. Number 2, the recommendation, receiving report and providing feedback to the general manager. That doesn't refer to 5.10.1 or 5.10.2. That's saying giving some feedback. So Mr. Laverde was quite right. He was giving us some advice on where he sees it, that the end decision comes at this table, and then obviously it's got to go back to the, the NRSBU committee and back to us again. So my feedback to the general manager would be similar to what we got there, but not precisely what Alec Vertis has articulated. So when we are pushing, when I'm recommending on number 2 there, that is for that feedback, as we discussed before. It may not be in exactly the same figures or years or numbers as is there. That is a suggestion by the officer and taken on board, and I understand exactly what that suggestion is and the why.
Well, do you want to include some words like provides feedback consistent with paragraph 5.10 in the report?
I think that's.
Well, recommendation is provide feedback to the general manager, and we're about to give you that feedback. Is that correct?
Can I, so the issue is, Councillor Skinner, is 6.1 of Officer Lavertis's report says officers recommend that the committee provide feedback to the NRSBU General Manager as detailed in this report. So the feedback at the moment that we are debating is the feedback contained within the report. It's the officer's advice. What I would like to have incorporated into it is some of the comments which we've heard today. And so, and when I have heard the comments, or my personal view is, and some of the, having heard from Nathan and Kit as well, is that, and I believe that Alec is going to do this anyway, because he has repeatedly said he is in the meeting, is that Appendix D, which is page 70 of our agenda, are important priorities for us. So we want to ensure that we have a business plan which is affordable but is delivering to the objectives laid out in Appendix D. So I would have liked to have incorporated that into the recommendation such that it read, provides feedback, etc., as laid out in the officer's report, but with an emphasis on the values as set out in Appendix D of the business plan. So that's my preference, because I feel much more comfortable than Alec understands that the conversation is still around those values and how do we achieve them.
Be fair to say, I'll ask a question of Mr. Clark. Appendix D, they are basically reflective of many of the conditions of the resource consent.
Appendix D is essentially, it is to some extent the values of the NRSBU as an organisation and the values that the board has ascribed to in its forward projected, the way we want to do work and what we want to achieve over the next period of time. At the moment, those are the focus, essentially the focus areas that we've pushed in our current version of the asset or the activity management plan, and by inference, therefore, in the business plan. And so a lot of the spending that we have in our business plan is related specifically to those focus areas. So in the event that we take on Councillor Fulton's feedback, it would result in us continuing to focus on the areas that we are focusing on, and therefore not result in a lot of change in terms of capital and other expenditure. So essentially, that's the implication of that change.
So through the chair, the only comment I offer is not necessarily. I think what Mr. Nathan Clark needs to do is restore, and I'm not saying this is an easy task. What Mr. Nathan Clark needs to do is still reflect the values of the NRSBU and the values of the Nelson City Council and the values of the TDC, but still reflect a prioritization of the operational budgets and the capital budgets. I don't know what the board is going to recommend and bring back to this council. If they bring back something similar to what's on the table at the moment, we will be in the same debate. I will be telling you that what is being proposed is not sustainable and changes will need to be made. What the board may need to consider is not giving effect to the criteria and the philosophy of Appendix D, but spreading that out over a number of years, but still giving effect to the values of the NRSPU and the two councils.
Okay, based on that, I'm happy. We'll just go with the recommendation as it is.
Right, well, we'll open up for debate. Okay, I've got a batting order, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Noonan.
So we've got a lot of tough decisions coming up and tough decisions we've made in the past. This one is a priority, and I'm always trying to see where we can save $1. This one, some of this, I believe, yes, I thank you, Ms. Levitas, and the advice you've given has been very good and very helpful. And yes, prudently, we need to spread out what we can, but there's some of this capital, no, we can't spread out. It needs to be done. So I think, to be fair, I was a bit concerned about the tone of the meeting, that a lot of this has come about through, it seemed like, oversweating the assets, or oversweating the asset, or negligence wasn't the word used, but I don't see that. I felt the NRSPU has been run extremely well, and the asset has been run extremely well. And the way that we treat our sewage is an exemplar to many cities around New Zealand. What has happened is we've gone through a resource consent process, and we've obviously public have been very strong on that. We look after our estuary, etc., and that's what we've been doing very well. But we get things like these large storm events, and then we get things like inflow and infiltration into the sewage system. And it doesn't matter how big your asset is, you can't handle all that at once when it comes in. And inflow and infiltration hasn't been due to oversweated assets, it's often from new subdivisions, etc., pushing into that. So I know we do a lot of work on that, but these areas and the NRSPU have wisely said, right, we're going to even step up our game even further. And we're going to bring a whole system up, so that can not just that, go over top of our minimum requirements, reach out even further, because we have in good faith received the resource consent, and we want to make sure we maintain that resource consent if we need to ask for it again. So we need to make sure that we invest wisely, and that might mean investing quite heavily in this plant to ensure its functionality in A grade. It might seem like a bit of gold plating, but it's something that's very important. The health of our people is very important. So we can't, there's no such thing as over investing in our sewage system. The health is paramount, and that's what we're doing here. If you look at what the capital program is there, you've got here the odour and equipment upgrades at Rabbit Island, very much for our resource consent that came up, our power supply upgrades at Best Island. When the power goes down, you need to have the backup power, and that can be a problem with flooding, etc. So that's where we've increased that even further. So we make sure our power supply upgrades, the regional pipeline capacity upgrades, you know, Tasman area is growing a lot, and Nelson is growing a lot. So there's always a larger demand, and there'll be an increasing demand, maybe more than we expect. So some of this capital is I see is very important, and it isn't due to any lack of oversight or lack of foresight or oversweating the asset. We've made use of this assets when they've been able to be used further, and a bit like the analogy before, you can still have the old axe, but it's got a new handle and a new blade, and it's a completely new axe, but it's still the old axe, and we've done that very well. So I'm imploring to you at the table that by all means take on the officer's advice here, but don't be afraid to spend a little bit more on that capital, and maybe it's more the OPEX that we can stretch out, and that may be a bit counterintuitive to how we operate as a council on a lot of things. We tend to think, right, we'll just borrow more on our capex and borrow more rather than straight into rates. But this is something that is going to have to take a bit of burden on the rates, because this is what the public have asked for. Said, hey, can we engineer this well for future use and make sure that we don't have any overflows, etc. So I implore that the feedback is, yes, stretch out what we can, but some of that capital infrastructure will need to be done. We'll just need to bite it. We've got another report coming up here of the landfill, and maybe you can make some cuts there. You know. But I don't want to be arm wrestling with Kit Mailing. He'll probably beat me in arm wrestle over what we should do, and we've got to be in step, both councils in step, and I think we can be in step here on this, and it will mean a little bit of hurt and a bit of capital expense, because the public have demanded that we improve our game. The resource consent, and in good faith, our resource consent, we think we could go over and above our requirements, and this is what we're doing. But some of these are essential, the capital. But I'd like to see Mr. Levertis from the feedback, and Mr. Chair, the feedback to the NRSPU and for TDC. By all means, stretch out what we can, but some of that capital will need to be spent, and we may be coming back to have that same debate again. But I think go back with a brief fairly broad, because we've got a bit of movement between the two councils. They have their financial challenges, we've got our financial challenges. So I don't want the feedback being too narrow at this stage. Be fairly broad on what we can stretch out, and some of what we might need to spend on. We might need to make those cuts somewhere else, or savings somewhere else outside of the storage business unit. But this is an important bit of kit. It's not the most sexy committee to be on. It's not the most sexy asset to have, but it's probably one of the most important assets that we've got, and we need to do well into the future. So yes, I'm saying by all means spread it out, but we will need to bite the bullet and spend a bit on this. I don't know if that's been too broad to Mr. Levertis on that, because I understand you put a lot of books to balance. This is an important book. Thank you.
Thank you. I support the recommendation, and I think that our officers have pretty much nailed where that needs to be, the time needs to be spent to look for some savings on how we can achieve this. Look, this is an indication. I'm going to read some notes because I don't talk for very long. I'll run out of steam. So if that's okay with the chair, it's very little. Look, I just think this is an indication of how we've been looking after our assets, and this is only the first one to be brought to us, and I think there are going to be many more. I think we've been dodging our investments on this and other assets, and it's time to face some difficult decisions. I don't think it's going to be easy, but we can't keep going on just pushing things along. And we need to keep our assets in very good condition. And when I look at the asset management plans, and the assessments are a level 3, which is not very good. And that's where we aim to be. So level 3 is not going to cut the mustard for me, and I don't think it should cut the mustard for anybody else, because it's quite a low aim. We should have regular asset checks of where we go. We've been caught a couple of times. The eyesight building is an example. We should have known that was not in a condition that it's ended up being in. So we need to take more notice of our condition assessments. We need to make our planning better. We need to budget better. What worries me is that we do collect. We had the discussion about depreciation, and we do take depreciation, but the depreciation we take goes off our debt. And then if we need a lot of funds, because there are a number of things that need to be fixed, our borrowing would just breach. So we do need to be very careful, and we need to prioritise very carefully. And I think that in the past we have been good at making our assets last longer. I mean, the water treatment station is a great example, but that's checked regularly to make sure it is absolutely where it needs to be. And if it can last longer, then it's made to last longer. If it needs replacing, it gets replaced. Water, sewage, landfill, those are the basic requirements that we should be spending our money on. So this does need to be done, but I absolutely agree with the staff. They are going away to look at the right things and find out what we can. But really, it is just the first, and it does worry me about the condition, or the aim of our condition it's not high enough, and we deserve better for our ratepayers. Our community facilities should be up to scratch. They should be good. They should be good quality. They should be something we're proud of. And if you go around and look at some of them, I don't think I'm certainly not proud of some of them. So this is the beginning of a journey, I believe. We're going to have to look at what we have and look after the things that are important. So we're going to have to do this together. So we'll all be looking at each other to get it done the right way. So yes, this is the first step I approve of what the officers want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking for the recommendation. We've heard that this kit isn't sexy, but I think if it stops poos and wees from ending up in our waterways, in the sea, and even on our beaches, then I reckon it's sexy as. Looking after sewage sustainably and preventing raw sewage from ending up in the environment is really one of the basic reasons why Nelson City Council and TDC exist, in my opinion. So I agree with previous speakers that we really need to do as much as we can. I think what's really important is that we communicate to people why we're doing it and why we're spending this money. I think particularly with sewage, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And to be honest, people don't like thinking about it very much. Some people will have even possibly been a little bit upset that I said poos and wees. We just don't like talking about the stuff. But I think it's really important that the community gets a better grip of what it is that we do with our sewage and how it's treated and everything else, because we've come an incredibly long way from when we used to actually just push down a pipe out into the sea. And that's a great thing. But, there are costs involved, and we need to, I think, better communicate why this money gets spent. And I'm just wondering, a couple of quick questions, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, and maybe Mr. Laverdis can answer them. But do we have open days at our treatment sites for the public to go along and have a look and understand what it is we do?
I probably wouldn't be able to answer on behalf of Bell Island, and maybe Mr. Nathan Clark can.
The answer to that is we do have open days generally for interest groups, not for the general public, although we are looking at trying to do that for the general public, and it's something that we're hoping to get done.
I would really encourage you guys to do that. I think that'd be very valuable. I think the more we can do to explain to people what it is we do, the better.
Part of the issues that we have is our facilities.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we are in the middle of debate, and I let you ponder on that, and may we continue.
Okay, yes, balance.
Thank you.
Well, thanks you for thank you very much for that. And so you've heard my thoughts. I think this is obviously very important work that needs to be done, but it's also very important that we explain even better to people what it is we're doing and why.
Those against will say no. Carried. Look, just grab a cup of tea. We were meant to have a break at past, but we're behind schedule, so just grab a quick cuppa and come back to the table. Right, next item on the agenda is the NRSBU activity management plan.
So through the chair, as I indicated when we presented the previous report, the previous report and this one go hand in hand and both feed off each other and feed into each other. So if we could reflect in order to move things along that the comments that I will be giving the general manager in relation to the business plan will obviously affect the activity management plan, then it's one and the same.
Right.
When one gets adjusted, the other one will get adjusted.
Okay, it's been moved.
I hadn't even sat down.
Gotta be quick. Okay, well, at least we've got something to talk about. It's been moved by Councillor Skinner, seconded by Councillor Courtney. Any questions of the officers? There be none. I will open up for any debate. There being none, I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Right, next one is the Regional Landfill Business Unit Annual Report.
And through the chair, we'll take that report as read, and in line with the report that we presented on the NRSBU, we report this back to the Infrastructure Committee, and Mr. Nathan Clark and Mr. Andrew Bishop will be at the table should you wish to ask any questions.
Right. This is page
82.
82. 82. Pretty short report. And the attachments go through to page 107. Any questions of the officers? Yeah. All right. Give me a moment to sort of catch up. Things are moving on quite nicely.
82, Councillor. So
No, this is the annual
through the
report.
chair, that's the next report.
That's the next one. This is basically the annual report from last year. It is what it is.
Happy to receive.
Yeah, this is just the annual report from last year.
Happy to move that you
It's been
receive.
moved by Councillor Skinner. Councillor Brand is seconded. Got to be quick.
I'll say we're here.
No questions, any debate? Come on, no debate? Oh, I'll move it. That's been put the recommendation that we receive the annual report. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Right. Next one is the business plan, pages 108 through to 130.
So through the chair again, this is the officer report in connection with the business plan, similar to what we did on the NRSBU. I make the only comment that I do make is that the business plan, the operational and capital costs in this case are slightly different to the NRSBU because those costs relate to the increase in the landfill fees and charges at York Valley. And those changes reflect an increase of 20%, which is, I note on my report on page 110, item 5, that the 20% is not insignificant. And that any increase, what usually happens, any increase in the landfill fees, we as officers bring a report back to council around about February, March in relation to the effect of that on our other fees and charges, specifically at the Pascoe Street transfer station. So typically, if this is a 20% increase, we will recommend that the Pascoe Street transfer station fees increase by 20%. So I draw your attention to this. The board has the delegations and authority to set landfill fees and charges. but equally I have an obligation to report the business plan back to you. So I just highlight that the 20% is not insignificant and that it will have a flow-on effect on other fees and charges. But other than that, I will have Mr. Nathan Clark and the Deputy Chair of the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill, Councillor Walker, answer any question.
Mr. Clark, to the comments from Mr. Levertis.
Yes, I'd just like to say that we accept that this is a significant increase in the cost. The Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit is an interesting business unit insofar as 90 or thereabouts of 90% of our costs are not in our control. And we say that is that we are required by law to pay an emissions trading scheme cost, for our emissions that we discharge. We are required by law to pay the Ministry for Environment waste minimisation levy, and we also have another levy, the local disposal levy, that we are required by our terms of reference to pay to the Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council for the waste minimisation funding. And those costs add up to nearly 90% of our charges. So the bulk of our increases in cost come directly from changes to those elements. We aren't able to change those. There are some minor changes to other areas, but that's the key element of the 20% increase.
Right, questions. I've got Councillor Fulton, Councillor Courtney, then Councillor Noonan and Councillor Skinner.
So just to be clear, we're in the business plan right now? Yeah, so page 125 of our agenda, section 11 on waste minimisation. You mentioned a number of waste minimisation opportunities have been considered. However, only waste diversion to Eves Valley has been adopted for implementation. I just want to understand what other waste minimisation opportunities were considered and why they were ruled out. I'm assuming that the waste diversion to Eves Valley is, actually, can you remind me? I'm assuming it's soil, but I might be wrong.
So the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit its mandate is to landfill wastes that are generated within the region. We aren't in the game of waste minimisation, so to speak. That is in the mandate of Tasman District Council and Nelson City Council. What we have chosen to do is to enable Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council to divert wastes by having a location that they can divert wastes to. And that's essentially why we have chosen to include the Eves Valley landfill upgrade, essentially allow those wastes to be diverted to Eves Valley. Now, the reason for that is both from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective. The new waste minimisation levies coming out from central government require payment in 4 years' time of $60 per tonne for general waste. And if we can divert wastes away from the York Valley landfill site to another site, and those wastes are essentially clean waste materials, we do not have to pay all of that $60. We will only have to pay $20. So there's a financial incentive for us not to put clean waste material, woody or other stuff that can be diverted, construction debris, etc., into our landfill. We do not pay the $40 extra for doing that. So there is both an environmental benefit and an economic benefit to us for having this alternative location for disposing of this material.
Thank you, but you still didn't quite answer my question. What other opportunities were considered?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor.
And I appreciate that the direction comes from the councils because we've been around this quite a few times, but I do want to tease this out a little bit in terms of the opportunities for you to participate in waste minimisation.
Thank you, Councillor Fulton. Other opportunities that were considered were diversion of other or plastic materials that are non-recyclable, or to package them and to locate them somewhere. essentially to stockpile them for some future opportunity. The other one was to give direction to or feedback to Nelson City Council around the importance of organic waste diversion to the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit. We haven't gone into any details around any of those other opportunities. That's essentially, from our perspective, not in our mandate. So we've chosen not to go further, other than having conversations about those things with our respective councils.
Okay, so the issue around the plastic stockpiling, which have been, we've decided that they are going to go to landfill rather than continue to be stockpiled. And then the issue around organics, so kitchen waste and garden waste. And that's been picked up by each council, you believe, adequately?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. That's
okay. Thank you.
Right.
I hope it's adequate. I think it is.
Right.
I was going to offer. I'm not too sure that's a
question.
Nathan would be giving his own personal view, and I'm not too sure that's fair on him actually.
Right. You done, Councillor?
Yeah, I'm done for now. I
Okay.
might have a couple of more questions around waste minimisation.
Right, Councillor Courtney, then Councillor Noonan, then Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through to Nathan. It is a large increase, 20%. You've got a captive audience. They can do nothing about it. Who's it going to impact most?
Our customers. We've had meetings with our customer base so far. So we've met with the solid waste manager at Tasman District Council. We've talked with the Nelson City Council solid waste engineer. We've talked with the CAN plan, smart environmental waste management, enviro waste. The feedback from all of our commercial customers has been that they expected this and that they knew that these new charges were coming in. And their primary response is that they want sufficient lead time on our fee increases so that they can implement those changes into their commercial models. So none of them have expressed horror or dismay. Yeah, so I mean, and we are not really able to do very much about any of these things. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Just another question. I'm just wondering, you know, in the report that we've got before us at 4.6.2, it highlights the reasons for the increase, you know, the government's waste minimisation levy and the carbon emissions costs in relation to that under the New Zealand emissions trading scheme. And then it mentions NCC and TDC, the increase in their local disposal level. Which of those three contributes the most to the 20% increase?
I'm sorry, I can't off the top of my head answer that question. I'd have to refer potentially to either Andrew Bishop or Ian Satterwhite, our asset manager. My expectation is that the local disposal levy has a big influence, but yeah, so the central government increase is essentially equal to $700,000 increase, and the local disposal levy has an increase of $600,000 on an annual basis. So those two are very similar, you know, in terms of their cost. But the largest one is the central government levy.
The largest one is the central, and the next is the
carbon emissions isn't so big in that respect. So the second largest is the local disposal levy. So the reason the carbon emissions are very important is that is one that we can make capital investments and drive that cost down, and therefore offset the increase in cost associated with some of the other costs that we are incurring. And that's a big portion of our planning, is to focus in on the ETS and the carbon emissions to maximise the capture and destruction and reuse of carbon of the gas from the landfill, and to reduce our emissions so that we can reduce our emissions trading schemes costs and therefore offset the costs associated with those other increases, those other local and central government increases that will affect us.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you. You're through the chair. I think I heard you say that 90% of the charges were sort of out of our control. Okay.
I think it's 87%, but
Yeah,
okay.
okay. So what I'm thinking on the other side of the ledger, are we applying for funding for waste minimisation? Are we getting much back on the other side of the ledger? I'm thinking.
No, that's correct. That isn't appropriately directed to me. I think it's better directed to.
So through the chair, yes. Can I just clarify that what Nathan is presenting today is the regional landfill. Waste minimisation does not sit under the regional landfill's mandate. It sits under the banner of the solid waste activity management plan with each council. And we've presented that solid waste activity management plan to this committee, and issues such as how we reduce, what Nathan's referring to is that, not putting words in his mouth, but Nelson City Council has taken the initiative to commence a kitchen trial, and potentially with looking at the success of that and potentially rolling that out. And that will go a long way to achieving our reduction of 10% per capita per year, as dictated by the Joint Waste Management and Waste Minimisation and Management Plan. So questions relating to waste minimisation are not a question that Nathan can answer, because it is not under his mandate.
Okay, well, I'll twist it around another way. Is there anything that you can apply for that will help reduce, that we can use in a meaningful way that can sort of offset this huge cost that we're paying to the government or to wherever it needs to go to?
There is a fund, the Waste Minimisation Fund, that you can apply to for funding, and we have been exploring in combination with Tasman District Council and Nelson City Council solid waste managers that fund. The two solid waste managers meet with the Waste Minimisation Fund person recently in regard to what the criteria for that fund were. And that doesn't really apply to what I do. It's all about waste minimisation or litter reduction, those sorts of activities. There is, for us, one of the features of our business and or long-term plan are the increase in our capture of landfill gas. And in particular, the Eves Valley landfill has no gas capture system. It is discharging significant amounts of methane to the atmosphere every day, but it has no gas capture system. There is no financial incentive or no legal responsibility on us to put a gas capture system in there. The ETS system is, in my opinion, flawed, because it does not give us any mechanism to create a carbon credit or anything from that at the present time. What we have done in consultation with our board members is we've agreed that we will proceed to try and get a Paris Accord agreement, which the New Zealand government still hasn't fully signed up to allow us to fund that emission or that gas capture project. Now that is at risk. I mean, it's something that the government haven't fully signed up to, and we'll have to do some arm twisting to try and get that to become something that will get over the line. But we believe that's the cheapest way and the most cost-effective way of mitigating emissions in the region. It would cost us something in the order of $2 a tonne is our really rough expectations for mitigating real emissions. The problem we have is that those emissions are not accounted for under our rules. The way the ETS works is when we get 1 tonne of waste and it goes across our weighbridge at our landfill, we pay at that time for all of the waste, all of the gas that's generated from our waste into the future. So we have already paid for the carbon emissions from all of the waste that has gone into Eves Valley. If we put on a gas capture system and we were to capture and flare that, we can't actually get rid of, or we can't actually capture some of that funding that we've already paid for back again under the current rules. And we would like to try and do that if we could. So that's the only, in my opinion, at the moment, the only way we can reduce our funding by getting an external source of funding for the landfill business unit. And we will carry on with that process.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if the committee can support that by writing a letter. Maybe if the chair could write a letter to support that application. Is that something we can do, Mr. Chair?
Is it work you got underway or planned for?
We have funding as part of our business plan and our long-term plan. We have some money in there to be able to support the application. So there's about $100,000 in the plan to support the investigation and the application for funding through the Paris Accord Agreement.
I think if we could write a letter, if the chair could write a letter of support to support your application, I don't think it would hurt.
No, we would welcome support.
Can I request that be considered by the, maybe you could test the meeting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't think there'd be any argument from the
Okay.
council.
And I've got one other question. I'll leave you to ponder on that. Yeah. Just one other question is, look, with the increase in the fees and charges, obviously that's going to hit the pocket of the and Councillor Courtney talked a little bit about that. Do you have any concerns that maybe people will just dump their rubbish there?
There's always,
not at the dump.
Yeah, there is always fly tipping going on in the communities. Again, this isn't something that I am in charge of. It's something that is taken, is under the NCC and TDC for our region. Clearly, we want to minimise the cost of landfilling. We want to minimise that because we want to landfill or to collect and to store that material in a place that it's not going to create adverse effects. I mean, one of the issues that we obviously have is that there is a necessity for our service, and we have to provide that service. And we don't control. It's in the Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council's perspective of where the control of what waste minimisation or other activities go on. In the event that we don't do some of our investments that we are proposing, then the costs will go up significantly more. So what I'm not asking for money to put the costs up. I'm asking for money to invest so that we can keep the costs low. It's not the other way around.
Yeah. They said infrastructure was boring. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Thank you again, Nathan. Local disposal levy. Can you please explain to me that? Again, we've got these levies. What's the local disposal levy? What's that for?
So the local disposal levy is a levy that the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit funds or pays on an annual basis to the Nelson City Council and the Tasman District Council in order for them to fund their waste minimisation activities. The way we come to an agreement on the the local disposal levy is that the two councils consider their own needs individually. They then apply to the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit for funding, and we pay the lower of the two requested numbers. So
that's to sort of fund our recycling, etc. Was it right?
Yes, that activity.
And I see that in 4.9. That's 64% of the increases in the waste and local disposal levy. So
I mean, maybe Mr. Levertis could expand on that answer.
So through the chair, I just wanted to clarify that the LDL that each council requests, it just doesn't go into waste minimisation. It goes into a whole range of things. It goes into recycling, it goes into waste minimisation, it goes into running the transfer station. It goes into funding our communications, a whole range of things. And TDC put their money into a whole lot of initiatives. And what we do, as noted in our solid waste activity management plan, that whatever LDL we get, we cut our cloth to suit. So we get the lower of the two. This particular year, we asked for 3 million, and we got the lower of the two, so we got 2.7. So we just cut our cloth to suit. Yeah.
So you know how it kills me slowly every time I go to Pasco Street Station, and it's not $35, it's $45, and that's $55. Now it's going to be $65 at the station, and I see it's going to be close to $200 a tonne. I think, is that right? And I've said that at the end of the day, Joe Bloggs is going for land at the Pasco Street, and you're paying going over $60 now for a trail load of rubbish. Some of that is a direct cost of disposal, and there's a cost in. Of course, that must be captured, but then there's this LV LDL, etc., which is really a cost not directly to that bit of waste, but to offsetting recycling. So does this cover green waste as well? These fees end up reflecting on our green waste disposal at the Pascoe Street?
The green waste is generally, where possible, diverted to green waste processing facilities. That does not mean, however, that all green waste goes to those facilities. There is still a significant amount of green waste that comes to the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit. And in fact, we just had a study done on our waste recently. So we've done 2 of them. The intent being to try and drive our costs for our emissions down by getting the studies done to identify what waste we were receiving. And the data has come back, and it's only the first of those 2 data has come back to say that our waste in Nelson has a higher organic content than the national average waste and the default factors. So we cannot actually get our costs down. If we were to apply for an emission factor based on our waste distribution, our costs would go up. So,
and also just to clarify, green waste is covered by at the transfer station.
Correct.
Correct.
So I'm just trying. We've got it's killing me because just in May correctly, we put our charges up for waste disposal, 5-8%. Is that right? And now we're going up another 20% or so. We really need to be questioning. There's going to be more commentary here, but we need to really be questioning our means and strategy of disposal, because this is unpalatable. I'll leave it at that. I can't think of any more questions to try to make your job easier, Nathan, because costs are costs. But I still have concerns how we're making it very complicated for taking some rubbish to the dump, cost-wise.
Right, okay. Yeah, okay, got Nathan Dunn.
Through the chair. Do you think the 20% increase in charges will affect your strategic goal on page 117? Costs of disposal of residual solid waste are affordable?
It's a really good question. I can't judge what is affordable other than to look at feedback from Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council on the level of fly tipping. And the fly tipping being the people who dump waste in the side of rivers or other places illegally. And that generally stays relatively constant, even when we have increases in cost. So the definition of affordable is very difficult. We would like to keep the cost as low as we reasonably can from our community perspective. And the central government's direction to us essentially is don't keep the cost low, because we want to discourage landfilling, and that's why they are putting these new charges on top of each of the landfill businesses. And so the central government direction is to increase the cost to try and reduce the amount that goes to landfill and the behaviour of the customers. But the Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit's responsibility is to try and maintain those as low as we reasonably can for our community. In order to maintain them low, we have to be able to invest in such a way that we can offset our emissions or reduce our emissions, so that we can take that $2 million a year cost out of our costs. And that will then offset some of these increasing costs that are coming from central and local government.
Yeah. Councillor, do you have a question?
I do, thanks. Mr. Chairman, just picking up on the same thought. We have some neighbourhoods in Nelson where the residents struggle to actually dispose of their waste with the system that we currently have. They're not fly tipping. They've just got waste and they don't know what to do with it. They don't have funds apparently to get rid of it, and that requires cleanup days where social agencies actually organise for skips to come into those neighbourhoods so that rubbish can be taken away. There's a cost which comes with that, and I'm just wondering if any thought has been given to whether or not, if we increase our costs further, whether that incurs greater costs for us in terms of dealing with people who can't actually deal with their waste as things are.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. It is, in truth, it's not something I've specifically considered. And the reason I haven't specifically considered is I don't currently believe it's within my mandate to do that.
Sure.
It's a social activity that is currently, in my opinion, sitting under the Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council. My job, rightly or wrongly, is to accept waste and to landfill it cost effectively and environmentally acceptably, and to do that and to meet all of our regulatory requirements. And so while I can understand your perspective, and I know that other communities do these cleanup days, that's not something that is in my mandate
And I
to understand.
absolutely appreciate that. It should have actually been a question for Mr. Laverdis. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Through the chair, please.
So, I know you got a lot on your plate. So basically, the question is, if we put up our costs, our fees, then we already have some neighbourhoods where people struggle to get rid of their waste through the services we currently provide and private businesses provide. So if it gets even harder for those people to get rid of their waste, will that result in extra costs being incurred on council? Do you get my gist?
I do. So through the chair, waste collection or collection of rubbish is not a council-funded operation. So there are a number of commercial operators that provide that service, and Campaign Waste Minimisation Services, NELMAC. In terms of, I guess it's driven commercially. So if there are some places that they can't get rid of their rubbish, they would have to either, I don't know what they do, to be totally honest, and I haven't really been posed that issue, but at the end of the day, it is a commercial operation, and it won't have any effect in terms of garbage collection for the Nelson City Council.
Okay. I will just add that I suspect we may find that we possibly have agencies coming to us in the future saying we're going to need some help with getting rid of waste from some parts of town where the residents are struggling if it gets increasingly hard for people to get rid of their own waste. Just something maybe to look out for.
Okay. Councillor Fulton, back to you.
Back to me. Look, thank you. I think this has been a really helpful conversation. It's great to have you at the table. And I think you have picked up a lot of our questions around waste minimisation, and obviously your job is to receive the waste and do something with it. And council's job is to figure out how to get less waste to you. But I think that, and this has been one of my ongoing frustrations for many years, I think that there's clearly a tension here, because at the same time, if less green waste was coming over into your door, then your emissions would go down. If there was less waste altogether, then your emissions would go down and our landfill would be filling up slower. So even though it's your job just to receive it, there's a whole lot of stuff we can do to make sure you're receiving less and the right kind of waste. And my concern is around when we have things like glass or cardboard or green waste or food waste ending up in landfill when it could have been diverted. How do we address that? And how do we empower you to give that direction back to us, that we can do a better job in diverting those sorts of things? So, and this might be, I hope Alec's listening too, because
I am.
because it does say on page 119 in your business plan, it does say that you will minimise the adverse environmental, social and cultural impacts. So, and Councillor Laurie's touched on this, a bit like wheeze and poos, everyone is interested in what happens to their waste. It's probably sexier right now. People want to know where their waste is going to. They want to know when it ends up in Malaysia, our recycling, what happens to it in Malaysia. So we have got a massive global issue with waste minimisation, what happens to our recycling, how we decrease our consumption so we don't create as much waste. And I believe that you have a bigger role than you say you have, and I would like to ensure that is if we need to change the governance structure so you can give us more of a direction, we need to be doing that. So I'll let you both answer my question.
I'm happy to answer. In relation to page 119, we try to consider environmental and social and other things in our decision making, but we have to do so in context with our mandate.
Yeah.
And so we are not able to, to change things outside of our boundary lines. What we do is have conversations with our respective solid waste managers at Nelson City and Tasman District Council, and do that reasonably frequently so that we know what they are doing, what we are doing. And what we have made clear, generally verbal assertions to them that, our priority is organic waste and the diversion of organic waste. That's our priority. And the reason for that is obviously the carbon emissions and the costs associated with those carbon emissions. We are able to enable the diversion of other clean waste materials. So we have included that in our long-term plan. And those are the things that we can do within the context of our mandate. So that's what we do. I understand your perspective, but that was a question more for Mr. Levertis or for the councils themselves who set up the mandate that we work within.
Alec, can you answer my question?
The mandate is the solid waste activity management plan addresses that has already been through council. I agree with Nathan. Look, the issue of waste minimisation, is a strong feature of our activity management plan, and we are well on our way in terms of us reducing. I mean, Nathan, Mr. Clark has indicated that organic waste is one of the things that he would like both councils to reduce. We are well on our way in terms of starting that process. So waste minimisation is a key aspect of our activity management plan. So I don't think we're in
So do you think we've got the relationship, the mandate, the governance, the direction and that balance right at the moment, or are there things we could be changing? So, I mean, for example, if in 20 years we wanted the regional landfill to say, no, we're not taking any more green waste. If there's green waste in those bins, they can't come through to us. You've got to get it out. Or if there's glass, at what point in time does the NTRLB say, no, you can't bring that into our landfill because it's either recyclable, reusable, or should be disposed of somewhere else? At what point, is that 20 years away, or can we make that 10 years away? Because if we're really serious about waste minimisation, that's the step we're going to have to take.
So through the chair, I mean, if that is the direction that this council wishes to follow, then that's something that we need to write back to the regional landfill and give them that indication as to whether they have the mechanism to ensure that there is no glass or green waste in bins that are coming through. Is a task bigger than Ben-Hur because it's mixed up with a lot of things. But I mean, we already have a policy that green waste should not be going up to the York Valley landfill. That's why we take it that's why we have it at the transfer station. But there is a small amount that obviously still goes up to landfill when people put it in their bins through the commercial operators. So we already have a view not to send green waste up to the landfill.
But we've already heard today that we have a higher percentage of green waste to our landfill than other parts of New Zealand. So we know that direction is not working. And I guess I just think that there's a relationship issue where we both need to be working collectively to figure out some of these solutions.
And I don't disagree with you. So, but I think the issue of making sure that people's bins don't contain glass or plastics or green waste is a massive task. I'm not even too sure how we would actually ensure that that's not the case. But
I think they do it in Germany, so it's going to come a point in time when we're going to have to be having these conversations.
The issue raises significant. You're talking about glass and green waste, but building waste is the biggest.
Totally. But we've heard that there is some of that diversion happening already. So
the construction waste is a big initiative from the Nelson City Council, working very closely with Tasman District Council to ensure that deconstructed material is used elsewhere and does not go to landfill. So there are a lot of initiatives which are bounded by the Joint Waste Minimisation and Management Plan that both councils are giving effect to. So there's a lot of work happening in this space.
Thank you.
Question I have, I'm looking at basically 4.9 in your report and the capital expenditure. And I'm just looking at the line item that you've got in attachment 1 with the Pioneer contract and asset purchase. And bearing in mind, you're just saying just under a quarter of the increases due to capital expenditure, and then you've got a big single item. Just help me sort of, and probably the committee, the background to that, because
So the background to that Pioneer contract is that we currently have a contract with Pioneer Energy. They own and operate the boiler. Well, so they actually own the boiler that is run at the hospital, at the Nelson Hospital, and that uses landfill gas. So landfill gas is, as we create landfill gas in our landfill, we essentially sell that landfill gas to Pioneer Energy, and they then pump that gas to the hospital and burn it in a boiler, and the hospital pays them for the steam that they use at the hospital. We get a very small amount of money for the gas, obviously. Pioneer Energy get a commercial rate for the sale of steam, and the contract that we have signed up to at some point in the past gives exclusive right to the use of the gas by Pioneer Energy. And what that means is that actually we don't have control of our own gas to do anything else with it. So currently, Pioneer Energy use somewhere in the order of 15 to 25% of the gas, which means, the theoretical gas consumption somewhere between 75 and 85% of the gas is actually emitted to the atmosphere because of that contract. So this essentially is a way of getting back in control of our gas and being able to implement actions that will allow us to mitigate our carbon emissions.
So just for point of clarification, the line item you got in there in sort of year 2020, 21, 22 is basically, we need to look at that as an investment.
Essentially, we're looking at trying to purchase that back. We don't know what the exact cost is. We put a notional number there, $1 million at this point in time. And we are doing due diligence on that at the present time.
Right, thank you. All right, any more questions? One question from Councillor Nana.
Yes, and it's interesting because I always thought, and it's probably not a question for you, it's probably a question for Alec. I always thought that rubbish collection was a core service, but I've just been searching the Act and it looks like it was repealed because I don't know why, actually. So rubbish collection actually now is not a core service of council, as at last year. Is that correct?
Through the chair, council hasn't been involved in the collection of garbage for as long as I can remember. It's always been a commercial.
No, but it was a core service. So we had to make sure that it was available, I guess, until it was repealed last year by the look of it. Is that correct? I just want to be clear. I just want to be absolutely crystal clear that actually it is no longer a core service of council because it's been repealed in the Act.
Well, it is not a core service of council.
Yeah. So that I was on the misapprehension. Well, I was on the knowledge that we were. So it's good to see it in black and white. So now everyone will know.
Yes, good. Rightio. So that's enough of the questions. So we've got someone to move. There's a recommendation there. Someone prepared to move the recommendation? Councillor Fulton. Someone to second? I'll do it. So it's been moved, the recommendation on page 108 has been moved by Councillor Fulton, and I've seconded it. We'll open up for any debate. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I support receiving the report and I support us giving feedback to the General Manager of the landfill. Sorry, it was...
Yeah, no, that's right. Just right.
That's right. Sorry. So I support receiving a report, support giving a feedback. I don't support what we're potentially recommending of this increase. It's sort of paradoxical that we are trying to be more efficient and more environmentally friendly, yet we're sort of increasing the costs at an alarming rate. You can see we've increased it from 2009 19 or 5%, in 2020, $7, $19 and now $29 a tonne. It's getting to a point where I think we're paradoxical in the sense that we're charging, there's obviously a charge to get rid of rubbish, and you don't want people rubbishing willy-nilly, but there's also the cost we put on it for recycling, etc., and the local disposal levy, etc., and that seems to be a mushrooming or snowballing effect that in one sense you're trying to cut down the amount of rubbish and you cut down the amount of costs for it, and yet we're trying to spend more and more money on diverting this rubbish. And I sometimes wonder, more than just sometimes, often wonder how much of a negative effect that's having on the environment, and the fact the costs that we're doing in transportation and sorting and trying to remove the disposable or recyclable components, and in the end those recyclable components are just being delayed. It's just being delayed of going into the environment, not removing it. All we're doing is delaying the generation of rubbish. And I know that term I used before, or which I gathered from another speaker, in regards to conscientious consumption, and really it does fall upon the public to be conscientious of how they consume. And I guess it's now an offset of the lifestyles we try to promote of high density living and a consumeristic lifestyle, and this is the outcome of it. So I'd like to see us moving away from the local disposal levy, where it's not directly involved in the disposal cost of the rubbish, and more of that put on the onus of the consumer. So no, I can't support these increases because it just becomes completely unpalatable, and our processes and our practices of recycling, are they really achieving an environmental advantage? I tend to doubt they are. I think this recycling to the nth degree is causing a lot more usage of environmental carbon and disposal and transportation, etc. But I do also see we need to cover our costs on this. So I can't agree with this increase coming up, especially if it's in regards to some of these disposal levies, etc. and waste minimisation, when I think they could be done far more efficiently by the consumer and by just a mindset change, rather than us constantly adding that cost to offset an indirect cost. But it's a difficult situation here, but we just can't. Bottom line, we just can't keep putting up the cost of disposal at this sort of rate.
Councillor Courtney, then Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're on the cusp of a whole new approach to the management of our waste, whether it's solid waste, green waste, no matter what sort of waste it is, and we've got to face up to it. And the message that's been coming through loud and clear today by people that I'm impressed with, quite frankly, when I look at the management of our, our NTRLBU and our TRSBU.
Weeds Committee.
Pardon?
Who's and Weeds Committee, did you say?
No, I'm trying to keep away from that, quite frankly. But look at the calibre. The message coming through loud and clear is we need some investment. We need some investment to progress what we're asking them to do. That's the clear, simple message. And I think we've got to hear that. We just cannot say, oh, you can't have your 20% increase and, all the rest of it, because they can't do the job. And if we want to retain these people, and I must say, the gentleman before us today was right over the top of all his subjects in both areas. And so we can't shut our ears to this. The work needs to be done to perform and to get a satisfactory result. And so we need to support them. It's all about capital investment. And as he said, the presentation has said that it's not of their making. It's our requirements, central government's requirements in 2 or 3 areas, standards that we were putting upon them that now we don't want to pay for. Well, I think we're going to have to, and we're going to have to face up to it. And the sooner we do that, the better. And we can do a much better job than we're doing now. I'll leave it there.
Councillor Fulton.
Look, I've already talked quite a lot in this meeting, probably far more than I should have, and apologies everyone else. I must be on a roll today. I've talked about this many times over many years, and I do want to really acknowledge the work that Nathan's been doing and the work that Alex's been doing in the waste minimisation space. We have taken some tremendous steps over 10 years. I think I can remember asking maybe 5 or 6 years ago, well, what happens to our recycling? And no one really knew. We're at a time now when people do want to know what happens to every piece of waste. And Brian and I visited the turf, TRF, the MRF, a couple of weeks ago. The MRF. And I had to ask, what does it mean? And I still can't remember, but it's MRF, not MURF. That's what it's not like.
Materials Recycling Facility.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, it turns out that's what they're called all around the world. And for those of you who haven't watched it yet, I suggest you watch the Netflix series Broken, where they look at MRFs all around the world, and they some really similar setups, and I learned a lot. And most of our recycling is going to Malaysia along with the rest of the world's recycling, where it's being either burnt or thrown away or turned into, yes, ours is going to Malaysia, and or turned into some fairly toxic sort of mixtures in Malaysia. So it is a real worry. Plastics is a massive, massive worry, and this is beyond, I'm going a little bit beyond the scope. But what we need to be really thinking about is, as consumers, every step of the way, what we're purchasing, that actually ultimately it goes back to a commercial sense of who produced that product, and that product should be able to go back to the producer and be disposed of by the producer. So I heard recently that someone had taken 2 TVs to the electronic recycle centre. It cost them $280 to dispose of it in the right way, which is one of the reasons why we still have lots of recyclable or reusable waste ending up in landfill. Until we reach a point in time where socially it's acceptable to take what you've purchased when it reaches the end of its life back to whoever produced it, and they are responsible for its reuse and recycling, we're going to continue to have a problem with too much waste ending up in landfill. And I think that that's a really important part, next step in this conversation. Central government's picking up on that, and we need to continue to have this conversation with our landfill business unit, with Tasman District Council, and ensure that we are thinking really strategically in every area of how we can minimise our waste as much as we possibly can.
Right, thanks.
Against.
I'm speaking for. Am I still okay? Excellent, thank you. Look, yes, I do support the receiving of this and providing any relevant feedback. Look, excellent presentations this morning. Very good, high quality. Thank you. Look, what surprised me the most from this report is that 90% of these charges are not in our control. They go outside the region. I think that's horrendous. I think that needs to be communicated to our ratepayers, because I think that's an important part of if we're charging them, I think they need to know where it's going to and why. And there are probably, I'm sure there are reasons, and it's probably to encourage us to reduce our waste. So I think we are getting better. I think the communications has got better. I think we're putting out pretty good stuff from here. But look, if you're putting your rubbish out once a week, you're probably putting out too much. You probably need to pull it all apart and have a good look at what you're putting out. Because honestly, I put one out every 6 to 8 weeks, and it's only a 120 litre. And that might be, I don't know whether that's good or not, but that's a household of one. It would be really interesting to go around and check to see what is. And I think they probably do have a look at people's rubbish, but we can do better. I'm sure we can do better, and we need to encourage each other to reduce what we put out. So if we all do that and we buy less, which is what Councillor Skinner was saying, we do buy probably more, we can reduce our packaging. There's a whole lot of stuff we can do. I just don't like the thought of all that money going outside our community. If we were collecting that and reusing it and bringing it back, I might be wrong. But 90% of it is charges that are not our charges. So yeah, I just want to say yes, I'm receiving this and that feedback, but thank the staff and all those that are educating people to reduce, and I think that's the key.
So what I thought I'd do is I'd start talking, then I'd reveal whether I was going to be speaking for or against at the end, so that would be more interesting for you and that I would get to speak.
Speak for or against?
I will speak for. Yep. So, yep. Okay, so in a nutshell, I praise, as do other councillors, the good work that we've been hearing. We are fundamentally in this situation because we haven't taken waste seriously enough in terms of trying to get out of business as usual as a country. In fact, the whole Western world hasn't done that. The concept of product stewardship has been around for a very long time. And it's only been in this last government that we've actually seen some moves towards product stewardship, which is the person who, or the business that creates the waste has to take some responsibility for its disposal at the end of its life. And that is the future. That is the circular economy. That is where we're going. That's where we have to go. And I really hope that this new government takes this as seriously as parts of the last government did. Business as usual, you just got to say this over and over again. Business as usual allows businesses to make things that are damaging to the environment, but they don't have to pay for that cost. The environment ends up paying for that cost, and if the environment doesn't pay, the ratepayer and the taxpayer pays. And that is the privatisation of profits and the socialisation of costs, and it has to change. When it changes, we'll actually have a much, much better system, and I'm pleased that we're heading in the right direction. I just do need to check on something that got said earlier, and I'm not singling anyone out, but it was just a statement that our recycling goes to Malaysia. I thought we'd stop sending our plastics offshore because we were doing the right thing here in Nelson. Can I just check that statement that our recycling is going to Malaysia, because I don't believe that's correct.
So through the chair, from the 1st of July, we only collect recyclables that can be recycled within New Zealand.
That's what I understood. So we are not.
Sorry, that's not correct. Number 1s are being recycled in New Zealand into meat trays. 2s and 5s are still going offshore.
Point of order, we're in debate.
Yeah.
Why are we having questions in debate?
I'm sorry, but that was very clearly explained to us at the MRF visit. Only 1s are being recycled in New Zealand.
So as an elected representative, I would appreciate an email at some point explaining exactly that, because I understood we had taken that step to prevent our plastics going offshore. Yeah, and that we were only doing it so they could be recycled here. We were doing the responsible thing. So I would personally like it if councillors can get an email explaining that status. Thank you.
Aye.
Happy to move the next one.
And happy to second it.
So through the chair, the same comment that I did previously, the business plan feeds directly into the AMP. What changes in one changes in the other, and they reflect the same information. So yeah, no further comment.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I support what waste management plan, and my frustration with the cost of disposal and our recycling is no reflection on the good organisation from a landfill business unit. It's more the decisions that we probably take well-meaning in regards to our waste minimisation. So this is an example of my philosophy is pretty much is that recycling just postpones a permanent waste generation. So less recycling and less consumption, buy local and stop importing from China. But we can blame the manufacturers to some degree, but it really comes down to us as individuals and the way we consume. Stop and think before we consume. And as much of it you can buy locally, whether it's your fruit and vegetables, and we have some great manufacturers locally in Nelson who are very conscious of how they manufacture and energies they use. But the more we keep wanting more shiny things instantly in our favourite colour, the more of a demand we put on the planet, especially when we're importing it. So for this, I support what we're doing here in regards to the asset management plan and the assets that we need to look after and improve. But I just implore that we really take a strong look at how we go about our waste minimisation and be more of a conscientious reduction. Thank you.
Question, we've got, in item 2, we haven't provided any feedback. Would it not be appropriate to delete number 2 if we haven't given any?
I was giving feedback in my debate, and that's how we've done it in the previous
So
one.
through the chair, no, I think in the same way that we did the NRSBU one, the feedback is in terms of the yays and the nays. In terms, yeah.
Those against say no. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. On to something completely different. We'll deal with the water supply asset management plan. I'd like to invite Mr. Ruffle and Mr. Light. Are you joining Mr. Light? Yep. To the table.
Come, gentlemen.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the offer. There are no corrections or changes we'd like to make. And just briefly, this is the second stage of a 3-stage journey for the activity management plans. As councillors no doubt aware, this is simply the draft to come to council. And if council are comfortable with it, then it'll support the LTP and it'll come back to council after the LTP process has been complete. And we're just happy to ask questions, really.
Yeah. Question. Surely got to be a question. Yeah, please.
Phil and David, through the chair, when you look at the 2021 to 2031 draft water supply activity management plan, when you look at it and you read through it, what's your favourite bit?
Oddly enough, I feel most interested in going forward into the next 10 years with the climate change issues. I think there's such an overarching and substantial issue for us to address that it is the thing that attracts me the most. If I can have a number 2, no pun intended, it's what we actually do, how we finally collectively address the issue of our ageing assets sitting in the middle of the year. The two are not, they are interlinked.
Thanks, Phil. David?
Rightio.
No, David's going to answer his favourite bit.
So through the chair, it's very much the climate change as with Phil, and water losses as well, probably my area as well.
Water loss, thanks.
Great. Rightio. Other questions? Someone to move the recommendation then, please. I'm looking down the side of the table. Councillor Laurie, Councillor Courtney. Move Councillor Laurie, second Councillor Courtney. We'll move into debate. Any debate? Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, support, love the water, love your product, love your work.
Right. Okay, then no other debate. I'll put it. Those.
I know it's press times, Chair, but just yeah. I mean, obviously, I support the recommendation because I moved it. But going back to that interview that I heard on national radio, which everyone should listen to, that Stuart Crosby, president of LGNZ, did with Catherine Ryan. He does a great job of summing up how much things have changed in local government and how the funding for local government hasn't changed. And water is one of the examples he looks at. And he talks about how not that long ago, councils just took a pipe and they stuck it in the river and they sucked the water out of the river. Sometimes they chucked a little bit of chlorine in, sometimes they chucked a bit of fluoride in, and that's all the council did. It was all good. things have moved on massively since then, and that is a good thing. But once again, the challenges that this plan addresses also highlights the fact that our funding models haven't changed. And when you look at Wellington City Council, where they're considering a rates increase of over 20% for this issue, it is just something that we have to keep going back to the public and to the government about, because what we do is very important and we're not getting the funding tools to do the job properly.
Thanks, Councillor Laurie. I'll actually, the asset management plan is prepared by the officers. I'll speak in support of it. It's a credit to them. I think it does actually, does present us with the issues that we need to confront, and we do have an ageing asset, and we do have a bow wave of renewals that are required. And the fact that we've been advised, we've notified us, that means we are trying to get ahead of that, that bulge of renewals that are coming down the line. So I commend the officers for that. It does actually mean that we actually have to confront those issues. And I think the asset management plan, or the draft that's been presented to us, does recognise that and does give us a path forward. So I would encourage us to support it and get behind it. As I say, it's a draft. It'll come back to us with the LTP, but there'll be sort of some big conversations we need to have as part of that, the LTP round. So I'll leave it at that. Now the debate, I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Ruffle. Thanks, Mr. Light. Mr. Biggs and Mr. Light, let's talk about wastewater. You notice there's a pattern. We're doing it in sequence.
Through the chair, good morning. I'd just like some of you should recognise Warren Biggs here. He's our wastewater activity engineer. This is his first report that he's brought to committee. And so I'll be sitting here with him as we go through this. Okay, so we are conscious that time is, you want to be out of here by what time?
12:35.
12:30. So we did have a nice speech prepared, but we're going to cut this down a little bit.
I think you should have the opportunity.
And we'll just to keep this moving forward.
Well, you would have heard the debate we had about the NRSVU. So, Mr. Biggs, anything you wish to highlight? I think and you wish to share with the committee?
Kia ora, councillors. Through the chair, I take the report as read. The report and the attachment is read. It's a draft AMP, as Phil's already mentioned to you, Mr. Ruffle's already mentioned to you. Covers the period 2021 through to 2031. It'll be brought for adoption early in the 21-22 financial year. And I've left my notes for the rest of the story, Chair, so I'm happy to take questions from here.
Opportunity to ask some questions. Or we all maxed out after NRSVU.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's got to be a question. Okay. There are no questions. Someone to move the recommendation then, please.
Yep.
Councillor Skinner, Councillor Brand. Right, any debate? In fact, there's no debate. It means it must have been an excellent report.
Excellent AFP.
Okay, I'll put the recommendation. I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very, very much. Right, the next one and the last item on the agenda is the quarterly report.
Through the chair, I've just emailed Lois. You should be here in the next couple of seconds, hopefully.
We just talk amongst ourselves for a bit while I wait for the officer.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and through the chair. I would like to start with a little trivia. We have approximately 1,300 orange cones out there on our roads. 1,300. That's without some of the NELMAC work around trees and some of the other things out there. So there's a little more than 1,300 as well. Anzac to Maitai, the shared path at the corner of Halifax and Rutherford, is winning the most cones on one site at the moment with approximately 518. We are continuing to award work and we are presently out with expressions of interest for Awatea Pump Station. And due to the size and complexity of that project, we are following a more traditional tendering approach than we have been doing more recently. Section 4, Main Road Stoke to Sea, that's been going through an early contractor engagement process, and we awarded that work to Downers this week, and the first workshop with them involved is happening on Monday. Council signed the contract documents for MB, and we're awaiting finalisation of the signatures from government. We've had a phone call this morning to say that we should, before the end of next week, have the document signed and confirmed the additional funding of 7.5 million. You'll also note that for the first quarter, we've met our budget targets, which in essence has put 7.5 million into our community, which we're very proud of because that's a lot higher than we've ever done before. So we're really pleased with that, which is why there's a plethora of orange cones out there. We do require some additional funding for the final stage of Saxton 3, which is the section from Champion Road down to Main Road Stoke. We do have a shortfall there and we need some additional funds to allow us to complete that section. However, on a really positive note, the residents of the new Somerset Retirement Village came out to a very small opening of the footpath, and Councillor O'Neill Stevens did an amazing job of cutting that ribbon, and the residents had nothing but praise for the work and the footpaths. And what was amusing at the time was we thought they'd come in some mobility scooters because Somerset thought they'd do that, and they all said, "Oh no, we're more than capable of walking and we're very fit." And as they were walking down the new path, around the corner comes a walking group from Somerset Stoke. So they sort of met in the middle, had a bit of a chat and carried on. So, well, it could have been. It could have been. They all seemed to know each other, which was interesting, but some really, really positive stuff there. So if any of you have an opportunity to get out and have a wander around those paths, it's pretty amazing. It looks really good. That's all I'd like to say today, so happy for any other questions.
Yeah. Anything from you, Mr. Light or Mr. Parfitt?
Oh, nothing from me, thank you.
Mr. Parfitt?
Me, Mr. Chair.
Right. I'm sure there's going to be a heap of questions. Got Councillor Noonan, then Councillor Laurie, and then Councillor Courtney.
Thank you. Yeah, I did send a question through regarding 8.4, page 249. I think I was a little bit surprised that we're being asked for $320,000 because some local developments have dumped some fill on land causing a problem with heights. Is it normal practice for people to just go around dumping fill wherever they feel like it and then charging the ratepayer with consequences?
I'm not sure whether that's normal practice or not. In this instance, it's been a timing issue. So we designed this project back in around 2015. and the levels were done, the subdivisions weren't in place, all of those sorts of things had been done. And due to the delay for this part of the section, because of the lease agreements and things we had to get from property owners, development has occurred. So those developments have built their subdivisions up and shifted dirt around and raised the levels that had been there before. So we have had to meet their levels versus had we got the work done earlier, they would have had to meet our levels. So it is a timing thing, and it has cost us some more money as a result of that.
Through the chair, do we know who these people are and can we send them the bill? Because I don't want to pay $320,000 out of ratepayers' money.
So through the chair, I can just say that that's one aspect of there's several other reasons as to the additional budget. That is one contributing factor. All I can say is, look, we really do need this money to complete this last stage, and we're on the cusp of completing stage 3. I think the time, and I discussed this with the chair, I think the time that we would potentially spend in going backwards and forwards with the developer when there could be zero outcome is probably not a good spend of our time, to be totally honest. I think this is a consequence. I was reflecting the other day with Mr. Josh Large, who started off this project with Mr. David Light, and it's been 7 years since the inception of this project, and I'm just unsure, to be honest, and I'm just giving you a practical and pragmatic answer that I think going back to those developers now is probably not a good spend of our time, especially in light of the fact that we've got a contractor waiting to start this last phase, and with the excessive workloads that we have. I'm just being absolutely honest with you.
So then I'm going to suggest that I would not accept this in the future. So there needs to be something put in place where it just can't happen. So is there a procedure, a process, a policy, something that will stop this from happening in the future? Because that is not okay.
Through the chair, I agree. I don't think it is okay. Can I give you a guarantee that this would not happen again? I can't do that. Will we be looking at procedures to ensure that I just don't know how I can give assurances that this will not happen again. I would like to think that when we have a project that takes 7+ years to actually come to fruition, and we actually got another 2 or 3 after this. So this has been a decade project, and me even saying that astounds me in terms of the negotiations and the discussions we've been had. We will look at steps to see that we can avoid a reoccurrence, but I'm unsure that I can give you a guarantee that this will ever happen again. Once again, I'm just being honest.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I've been here for most of those 10 years, so I know how difficult it's been with the negotiations, and I was really, really pleased when we got the understanding from all, an agreement of all landowners to go ahead and do the work. I'm not happy with this sort of outcome, and if we have something like this in the future, I think we need to keep an eye on the areas surrounding where we're going to be. So this doesn't happen. It just seems an unacceptable thing to happen, that people can just dump their fill wherever they feel they want to. I'll debate that at the end.
And through the chair noted, I note, and I will do whatever I can do under my process to ensure that we don't get a reoccurrence, but I can't.
So just as, Mr. Chair, I did email, the other part of the concern was that the recommendation to council, which I'm happy with you, of course you have to do it, that embedding it into the quarterly report is problematic, and I did ask for some thinking about how we could get around the fact that it's sitting in a quarterly report instead of Saxton Creek upgrade extra fund request or something. It's just not going to show up in the future easily. Did some thinking go around that?
I'm through the chair, so this isn't the first time we've actually asked for additional funding through the quarterly report. At this moment in time, as you know, we've got a lot of pressures on us, and the quarterly report is the mechanism that we use to report this. As I said, this isn't the first time, and it's not inconsistent with what we've done before. So I'm unsure that that a separate report. I understand what Councillor Noonan's saying that in the title, but the resolutions do stand as a formal resolution, and I'm unsure just in terms of the workloads that we have, writing a separate report would be any greater benefit than including it in the quarterly report.
Thank you, Mr. Leverse. My response is that at that time, I know that we have had this before, and I raised it at that time as an issue, and I thought there was an understanding that we would receive a one-page, which is basically what you've got anyway, just pull out the bits that you've got. So again, I'm not happy with that.
So we're starting to get a bit argumentative.
I can clarify that the reason you got the one pager previously is because in that last quarterly report we had not included the last page, the important considerations for decision making, which we now do. So that has to be there so that we can make these decisions. So that was the reason why we had to bring a one pager back to council at the appropriate time.
Right, Councillor Laurie, Councillor Courtney, and then Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a bunch of questions, so bear with me. The first thing I'd just like to observe is on page 253 at 12.14, there's a fantastic news item. It tells us that B-card use for our buses accounts for 78% of all bus trips, showing a good uptake of the scheme. I think that's fantastic news. Well done, everyone involved. I was just wondering, can we get it higher? Do you think we can get it higher? And if so, how?
Certainly, through the chair. It's incentivised already. It's a cheaper way of travelling on our public transport than cash, and I think it might take people a few trips to work that out. The B card is in fact compulsory now for Super Gold card users. So if they want their free travel at off-peak times, they must have a B card and they must show it. So that will possibly raise our percentage in our recordings as well. So ongoing, and yes, we're equally delighted with that very good uptake.
And through the chair, does B card uptake, or the uptake of deals like the B card, does that typically result in more use of public transport as well?
So through the chair, we of course monitor our boarding numbers, and this year has been quite atypical. So we're still tracking at just around 88% of patronage compared to this time last year, which is actually quite a good news story. So a better news story would be that we're growing public transport, of course, but COVID has impacted on people's perceptions of safety around use of public transport. Auckland and some of the larger metros have taken a much bigger hit on their income. It's as low as 60% of this time last year's in some of those metros. So with us tracking at around 88%, we're pretty good. We're pretty happy with that. Look, in the whole, we're trying to improve the public transport experience. As you know, we're doing a public transport review. The next regional land transport plan will have improvements to public transport within it. So as we continue to improve the level of service, we hope our patronage will grow even further.
Awesome. So someone I know recently hurt himself and ended up taking the bus to work for the first time in his life, and was just absolutely thrilled at the service. And it was interesting because he'd never really used the bus before, but he found the service to be so much better than he thought it was going to be. And I'm sure lots of people have that experience. My next question is in relation to page 255, and it's about the Three Waters Services reform. At 14.12, it says that the report says that the request for information will be applying significant pressure on already fatigued staff. Officers will be investigating what projects or programs, particularly those managed by utilities business, will go on hold to help manage staff wellbeing and workload. This kind of goes back to something I've been saying a couple of times already in today's meeting. Is there crowd funding for staff to do this work?
I'll get Mr. Lavertus to answer this question.
So through the chair, just to give you an indication of what we're dealing with here. So the Nelson City Council has been chosen to do a deep dive, if I can put it that way, to provide information. We have to provide that information no later than the 30th of January, and that's non-negotiable. There are something like 95 individual tabs that have to be populated. At this moment in time, we are pulling together a team, and it's as of today, there's about 13 people across the council, from David's team specifically, from Claire Knox and her team in finance, from IT, from Jane McLeod, and from the GIS team. There is money for additional funding, but at this moment in time, we are populating all of that information ourselves, purely because it's a lot easier. We know our assets. We are undertaking a conference call every Wednesday morning. It starts at 7:45 in the morning because we are calling into Scottish Water. We have, and that's for all the councils that are participating, and that goes on for about 3 hours. And then every Thursday morning, David and I call into our Solgum business partner, as well as our dedicated Scottish Water liaison for another conference call. So that just gives you an indication of the amount of work, and that's why we've put this in here. It's a big piece of work, and we don't know. Our chief executive is aware of this. And he supports us. We have to get this done, but at this stage, all we're signalling is that this is in addition to a really, really heavy workload. I don't know what it means. We're just signalling that we potentially, if we do drop the ball, we ask for your indulgence. But we've got 17 staff contributing to this, and it's a big piece of work.
Sure. So through the chair, if there is some funding available to help local government with this project, shouldn't we be putting a hand up for it and finding a way to help us?
As I said, the amount of time that it would take to bring in somebody to assist us would offset the benefit. We really know what we're doing, and we just need to get on. We just need to get on and do it. I mean, we're working to a very tight timeline. I have said to our staff that although we have jointly said that we'll try and get the majority of the work done by Christmas, because staff need a break, and I just really don't want staff coming back early in the new year just to get this done. Look, I can tell you that when we do the conference call with all the councils on a Wednesday morning, everybody's in the same boat. There is fatigue written on everybody's faces, and we just need to rise to the occasion and get this done, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Alec. Page 269, there's a status report on the Mount Street and Canini Street upgrade. I'm sure some people around the table will remember last term we had members of the Canini Street community coming and talking to us about the need to reduce some of the speeds going down there. Is this work in any way helping to do that? How has this work made Canini Street particularly safer?
Through the chair, at this stage, we've only got the Mount Street bit done.
All right.
And then we go through to Canini, and there is some transport work to be done at that. And I believe that there are some mechanism in place to help with that slowing of traffic.
Okay. Through the chair, can you give us any idea of what they are?
Through the chair, in detail, no.
Okay.
It'll be employing traffic calming, but I'm not exactly sure what the detailed design looks like yet.
Sure. But something is in the pipeline.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Page 277, the Railway Reserve underpass. I went through there yesterday. I went round it yesterday. Looks really sharp. Like the paintwork on the inside. I did notice a large amount of flooding under the underpass, and I don't know if that's just because the drains aren't working yet or anything else, but I thought I should draw it to your attention and ask whether thought had been, I'm sure thought's been put into avoiding flooding, but it was quite significant yesterday.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, we are aware of that, and it's happened because the other works that are going on haven't been completed yet. So once that's resolved, it won't happen.
Fantastic. Through the chair, page 280, the Tahunui Cycle Network, it talks about positive feedback has been received, which is good news. I just wondered if someone might be able to elaborate a little bit on that positive feedback.
Thank you. Through the chair, we received some feedback from a gentleman that was dead against the project in the first instance, and he had indicated that now it's done, he thinks it's absolutely marvellous. The residents along there now actually park outside their own homes, and there's been a lot more collaboration between that. And he has also found that the road traffic itself has slowed down and there's less traffic going across that road. So that was very good feedback, particularly from someone that was dead against having that work done.
I love those guys. That is awesome. Thank you. Almost there, Mr. Chairman. Page 287, the Anzac Park to Maitai link, which is using all those cones. It's something I've always been very interested in, but I don't remember actually seeing a design at all. But that may just be because I'm not a chair or a deputy chair or someone like that. But have we seen a design, a detailed design of what's going in there?
Yeah, through the chair. It went to the chair and the deputy chair at the time, and we shared all those plans at that time. But it wouldn't have been when this new
Right. Would it be possible for us to see them?
Through the chair, I think, I think probably on SharePoint we can probably put a plan of what it's going to look like.
Or an email. That would
it's probably. I think it'd probably be there ready, wouldn't it?
Through the chair, it's on Shape Nelson.
Shape Nelson. What did I say? SharePoint. Shape Nelson. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And my very last question, thank you very much for your indulgence and patience, everyone, is on page 297, the Miller's Acre cladding issue. I'm just wondering whether the remedial work, the new cladding, will change at all the appearance of the building.
Through the chair, this is a new one-page report that you wouldn't have seen before because this project hasn't fitted in infrastructure, but it has no home at the moment, so we're reporting on it. The final design of the cladding has not been done. They need to do a little bit more investigation work, and then the final design will be done. My expectation is it shouldn't make a major change, but I can't guarantee that at the moment.
Might I just suggest through the chair that the architect Ian Jack, who originally did the design for the building, perhaps be communicated with on that issue, given that it is a building that we put a lot of money into. It's a gateway building. It's one we're really proud of, and it would be a shame if its appearance in any way was in any way deteriorated. Thanks.
All right. All right. Thanks. Councillor Courtney, and then I've got Councillor Skinner, then Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Officer Plum or Marg. Councillor Laurie has really covered the field very, very thoroughly, but he's missed out a very important topic on page 252. I'm intensely interested in speed humps, and I'd like to ask some questions about that. What has triggered the speed hump policy review? What's been the force behind that, please?
Through the chair, our policies will have a review date, and that one is overdue for review. So it was up for review last year, and workload prohibited that. So it's just a timing thing. All policies get reviewed within a time frame, but we're really interested in the changing landscape around this, because the views around, no pun intended, but the appetite for speed humps seem to be growing as people are more accepting of lower speeds. So what we've traditionally done for speed humps might look quite different in the future. So it's really timely that we review that, and it's really appropriate that we trial different things before we do the full review.
Well, thank you for that. I really want to know too what you are planning, because you say here in 12.19, officers plan to trial various speed control devices. in various parts of the city next year. So I'd like you to expand on that, because that got me quite excited. See, I'm not as enthusiastic about speed humps as you are, and I'll just talk about that a bit later on. But anyway.
Certainly, through the chair. So speed control devices can take many shapes and forms, and speed humps is one. And they have had mixed reviews, that they can be noisy, and I can see why some people don't want them outside their homes. But there are other ways of slowing traffic, and it can be things like visual narrowings using line marking, or in some case posts. You might recall we did something in Seymour Avenue a few years ago where we put some little marker posts out in the road to create the perception of a narrowed lane, which has a slowing effect. The Innovating Streets project is really all about trialling different things, such as AstroTurf on the sides of road, or curb build-outs. So it can take many shapes and forms, and we're interested in looking at all of them. And of course, the most appropriate will be sometimes on a case-by-case basis. There are certainly places where we can't narrow because we need bus tracking curves. So you can't put build-outs or curbs on a corner if a bus can't get around the corner. So it'll be a case-by-case fit-for-purpose result that we install at various locations.
Thank you. Mark, you picked up that speed humps are noisy. People trip over them. Cyclists even trip over the cycle, break their bone, and yes, and they can be damaging to the person and the undersides of vehicles as well. So I would like to think, with the lowering of the speed limit in the CBD and in our neighbourhoods, as we're planning to do, that there might be a time when we could phase out speed humps. So I'm going to have to work on you with that, I think, because I really feel strongly that way. People do see them as an irritant. And I would have thought quite the contrary, that with the speed limits coming down in our neighbourhoods to, say, 40, even 30, but particularly in the CBD, that would trigger us to think about whether they should be discontinued in the medium term.
Through the chair, I think at the moment there is a place for something that forces drivers to slow down. In an ideal world, a road should be self-explaining, and you don't need a number on a sign to tell you what the speed limit should be. It should be self-explaining. You're in a mixed environment with walkers, cyclists, other vulnerable users, and you drive appropriately. Unfortunately, there are a sector of population who like to drive fast and at inappropriate and unsafe speeds, and it takes a physical barrier to force them to slow down, such as a speed hump. So I think until we get a very general attitude shift, and there will still possibly always be that minority of heavy-footed people, there is a place for physical speed control.
Thank you. Right. Okay, Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, cheers for that. The speed humps make it a bit difficult to go no hands all the way down on the bicycle down Bridge Street. So, moving on. Pay for plate, great to see the 50% increase in revenue from our parking, and I see the pay by plate is pretty much worked out exactly as you said it would work. And we supported you on that. So yeah, well done. My question is river flood modelling on page 249. 9.1. Can you explain, just get my head around that? So work on river flood modelling is well underway. In the next sentence, initial assumptions of tidal level and flood modelling showed an overestimation of the combined return period. What's that mean?
So through the chair, that was when we were looking at the combination of certain high tides versus a specific rainfall event. So the combination of such a high tide and a 1 in 100 year event equated in having an extremely high return period, which was deemed to be
a return period is?
So a 1 in 100 year rainfall event.
That's a return,
So if we had a certain tide condition.
And we had so this is an overestimate?
It produced an overestimate. So that was reviewed by expert consultants, and then we reviewed it, and then we said, okay, what's more of a realistic one that gets us closer to that, closer to a Q100, and something that was more robust and defendable.
Okay, so that's has some positive implications, I guess, in our ability to build in areas Is that right? So what we thought, we're putting those two models together, created a sort of return period, actually we've overestimated, and it's less of an issue. Am I reading that right? So,
I mean, it's reduced it down a little. I don't have the numbers to hand.
Okay. Is that, thank you. So thank you for that commentary in there. So, for example, does this relate to, say, at House down Trafalgar Street, they had to provide some flood modelling as part of their consent, came at great cost. Does that sort of mean that the flood modelling we are doing or should do would make it easier for people to fill in their consents as far as them having to require third-party modelling or so forth?
I've brought my my knight in shining armour here to probably answer more of those development type questions.
Thank you. Yes, through the chair. So this the updated flood modelling and mapping is still in progress. It's still going through that peer review, and it will be released early in 2021. Ultimately, yes, I mean, it just depends on the catchment and the site in terms of what the impacts of the new tidal boundary will be. For the Maitai, it does reduce some flood levels marginally, but at the same time, it's not just the river flood levels that have to be looked at, it's also the coastal flood levels.
Yep.
And the new coastal inundation mapping has just gone out the door yesterday.
Yep.
So ultimately, as you get closer to the bottom end of the river, the actual coastal flood levels tend to be higher than the river flood levels. So both of those have to be looked at. We don't expect substantial changes from the information we have at the moment.
Okay.
There may be some slight reductions, but the changes are likely to be modest.
Okay, and for those who are maybe doing some developments on properties in those potential areas, will that mean they can rely on, is this information open to the public to utilise for developers or so forth, rather than having a cost of bringing in third party?
So there's new coastal flood information that's available now to developers and the general public, and the river flood information that we're using is still the information that's on our website. So that's been on our website for a number of years now. So we're still using those levels until such time as the new mapping has actually gone through the peer review process, and it will all be updated for the Nelson Plan. So that's going to be part of the Nelson Plan consultation and updates to be discussed next year.
Thank you. And through the chair, just so those overestimations, what sort of factor is it? I know you're saying it may not have much of an impact, but for you to state that, thank you for stating it in there, but was it quite an over?
Yes, so through the chair, the actual sensitivity of flood levels in the Maitai, at least to different tidal conditions, was assessed. Some sensitivity analysis was done around that, and typically the changes were within 0.1, 0.2 metres. So not substantial, but there was some modest changes.
100 mil, 200 mil.
In terms of different tide levels, so you could change the tide level by a metre, and it resulted in about 0.1, 0.2 metres difference in flood level around Trafalgar Street.
Okay, well, that plays part. Thank you. That gives a bit of scale. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fulton, then Councillor Sansom.
Thank you, through the chair. I just had two questions following on from some of the questions which Councillor Laurie and Councillor Courtney have asked. My first question was around the three waters and the funding which we have received for that. And it relates back to earlier items on the agenda, and I didn't get to raise it during my debate. Have we considered how we could support the the additional costs for the sewage business unit through that wastewater funding?
So through the chair, there was some consideration of that, but if you can recall, we produced that delivery plan, and that was sent through to all councillors, and the final version that we came on didn't include the NRSBU. It focused purely on the Nelson City Councils, as did TDCs.
So is there a reason for that? Because if that's the end place of our sewage, and there's a whole lot of sustainability and biodiversity outcomes incorporated into their Appendix D, why didn't we turn our mind into achieving some of those outcomes as part of that funding?
Through the chair, we turned our mind exactly to that, to the needs of the Nelson City Council.
Just seems a little, if we could have taken some money out of that to help fund.
Happy to move what we've got.
I've got a second question. Thank you, councillor Skinner.
I wasn't meant to thought you'd finished with, but happy to.
Yeah, well,
My other question was around, councillor Courtney asked some questions around speed humps, and I think he's interpreted them as meaning a classic old speed humps. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about speed humps in terms of raising it up and having sort of 2 metres wide raised areas which people might use for crossing as well?
So through the chair, the response I gave was all encompassing. With that, they look different. There are the small rubber ones that are just quite severe. You might see them on the exits of some commercial premises, and then we have the raised tables that we have in the central business district and some of our shopping centres. And most recently, we will be planning to trial some that are about the width of a pedestrian crossing that are raised but rubber, so they can be bolted down. So that it's quite broad.
So when you're talking about speed humps, there's a whole, it's not just the...
Yeah, I talk about them in a broad sense.
Okay, yeah. We might need to think about the word, because I think that's how it's interpreted. Thank you.
Through the chair, I'll second it so we can move things along.
Yep. Thanks. So it might be for Toby, actually, through the chair. So just at 2.2, page 249, 9.1 under the river flood modelling. So I just want to clarify that the information that's being released on the City Council website through Shape Nelson for inundation levels is accurate. There's no change to that. That's been peer reviewed?
That has been peer reviewed, yes. So it's essentially the present day 1% coastal storm surge levels, and then increments of sea level rise up to 2 metres that's been released yesterday.
And so at some point, so this here is referring to the combination of both of inundation and flood modelling, and at some point will there be mapping released that shows that combination? Because at the moment I know that we can look online under natural hazards and see flood modelling, and then we can look under Shape Nelson and see inundation modelling, but I don't yet believe there's any way to see the combined.
Very good. Yes. So just through the chair for clarification, 9.1 refers just to the river flood modelling. That's not the coastal inundation mapping. So the coastal inundation mapping is a separate exercise. And ultimately, yes, both those forms of mapping will be released for consultation next year. So probably around March, April, May, we'll be consulting on those as part of the Nelson Plan process.
So for those of us or in the community who have actually looked at the inundation, when we actually combine flood modelling with the inundation, we're likely to see higher water levels than just from inundation.
So through the chair, yes. Essentially, we assess coastal inundation and river flooding separately. They're two separate forms of assessment. And with the river flood modelling, one of the challenges was to actually establish a tidal level that was appropriate to use. So obviously, if you combine a 1% river flood event with a 1% coastal flood event, you get something that's extremely unlikely. Yeah. So you have to actually come up with a reasonable probability for your river flood assessment. With the coastal inundation assessment, we're assessing our 1 in 100 year 1% AEP storm surge. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that, Toby. I just wouldn't want the community to think that the mapping that's been released is an overestimation, but it is accurate.
Correct. It is for the present day 1% events. Yes.
Thanks.
And the amounts of sea level rise shown.
Thanks.
Recommendation, including the decision recommendation for the additional funding. It's been moved by Councillor Skinner, been seconded by Councillor Brand. We've had the questions. Any debate? There'll be none. I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Those against say no. It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. And we'll close with karakia. Kia motu o te matu mahi, mo tēnei wā, ma kina ma irikatu, o gatu hoa, o matu wāna, ao ki te arangi. Thank you very much. Let those members who need to go to